Blessed love and peace. Recorded joint earlier today, at the beginning of the day, actually, 2 hours. It did not take. So, we are redoing it after essentially completion of the day. The sun is on the other side of the horizon. That's lightweight facts, though it's somewhat misleading because it's the horizon that's moving and not the soleil. Either way, it is the day. That's what I say anyway. Continuing on, the gist of what I shared before is this. There's a like the pyramid, or it's not the totem pole, because the totem pole is not properly understood in Western eyes. Hierarchy. That's not what the totem pole is. But there's like a pecking order of worldly power. Rice is on the way, y'all. Rice is on the way. So this is what it is. The actual emphasis of this delivery is on the latter part of this hierarchy. However, in the interest of the comprehensive articulation of the aggregate experience, the entirety is basically articulated here, and it becomes, actually, we count 10 components or 10 categories of beings or members of civilization, and to help with that differentiation and absorption of memorization and understanding, comprehension. It helps to do larger sets of categories. So one basic division or binary is the underclass and the overclass, and then the different components of each, the gray area of the borderland between the two, and understanding it accordingly. So here it is. The first few, again, we're starting with the underclass, then getting to the overclass. So we go with slaves. I'll go slaves, prisoners, workers, business. And from business, this is where the borderlands of underclass, overclass emerge. Business, lawyers, doctors, PhDs, pedophiles, cannibals, cults, and the satanic. Those are the 10. So again, it's not just lines of each way. There's these type of joints, and even kind of these type of joints. So slave is kinfolk who've lost self, and are just going through the motions. That's that. Then there's the prisoners who have some sense of self, but lack of discipline, lack of knowledge, and there's that. The workers are the main category of members of society, of civilization, the city experience, the city state. So, and there's large differentiation amongst the workers, all different types of motivations, carrots and sticks for productivity and obedience amidst the workers. High skilled, low skilled, blue collar, white collar, high class, low class, high income, low income, all the workers. That's that, and it's still the underclass. So then we get into the business, all those preceding ones, there's a direct experience of subordination, working for somebody, imprisoned by somebody, enslaved by somebody. So even the white collar, high income workers are working for somebody else, subordinate. Might be further appeased by it and comfortable being subordinate, being directly subordinate, answering to somebody else directly. Um, Feudalism, it's just a different form of feudalism. There's that. So all the underclass. Then getting into the overclass, business is one of the most accessible ways of endeavoring into the overclass. Many kinfolk are, and we're talking about entrepreneurialism. We're talking about like startups. We're talking about also gangsterism. Gangsterism is along these lines as well. Um, so, and gangsterism extends into the realm of governance as well when we get into the revolutionary rhetoric and pretenses and otherwise. But it's accessible. It's further accessible to the underclass, to the proletariat, or however. There's varying levels of skills. Usually, what it is somebody finds a hustle, finds a corner on the market, sets up shop, builds shop, and does that hustle. Gets a team together and puts it to work. Maybe gets a network, a chain, franchise, whatever else. But it's when people have some knowledge about doing something that's of value, and finding some security within that, and some sustenance within that. That's increasingly independent, not feudalistic, or at least less feudalistic. Many business owners say, "Oh, all our customers are our bosses." So that is a further accessible means into the endeavor of the overclass. Then we get into the trained, pedigreed kind of methodologies of entering into overclass or existing within overclass. Lawyers, doctors, PhDs. Gates, these are where the gates are. These are the gatekeepers. Underclass, overclass. Did I do that? Overclass, underclass. So, lawyers, doctors, PhDs. Lawyers are the ones that keep the order and set the laws, enforce the laws, lock up kinfolk, and keep that separation and keep the order of society. And additionally, and it requires credentials. There's a pledge process to get those credentials, and it's not just academic. It's life. It's like it's going through hell, literally, to get the credentials. Temptation with the devil, dancing with the devil, and all them things. Literally, that's what's involved, because that's what's involved in civilizational hierarchy. As I already indicate in terms of the overclass stratosphere, whatever. So, lawyers. The skill set for lawyers are generally, I mean, everybody has their own proclivities, whether it's mathematics or the art, the letters, but generally, particularly, and this is all today's experience. The gist of it, the generality, the general outline is applicable for thousands of years. This is the comparatively contemporary experience of this, and I can do some somewhat lightweight timeline translations. However, just finishing up with the sequence here. The lawyers are comparatively, the skill set is comparatively accessible to the masses. It's letters. Some people are just mathematics, and there's that, but generally speaking, the skill set is increasingly accessible. So that's why one of the reasons why lawyers are lower than doctors. Doctors, the skill set is less accessible. It requires an understanding of a high understanding of mathematics, chemistry, biology, the sciences. I gotta pay attention. We got soybeans brewing. So it's less accessible skill set. Further pledging, further credential, or further requirements to satisfy those credentials. And so then PhDs. PhDs. I gave an example of like the differentiation in the first iteration. That's the woodpecker. That looked like the woodpecker, but it looks like a different type of woodpecker though. Interesting that. It was sitting sideways like a woodpecker. However, it's not the typical woodpecker. There's different types. This one had different coloring, different body shape too. Look further like actually like a starling. in terms of body shape. Its coloring was like a sparrow, between a woodpecker and a sparrow. But anyways, it's that sitting sideways situation that lets one know that's a woodpecker, because something that's comparatively unique amongst the woodpeckers, being able to just climb trees vertically, to walk, I guess, or walk vertically up trees. I've only seen woodpeckers do that too tough. No other animal, no other bird, even like do anything similar to that. So, anyways, PhDs. The way I describe like the differentiation between lawyers, doctors, and PhDs. Lawyers wield knowledge of laws, and principles and ethics, even not if not practicing it, but direct human behavior. Doctors have a knowledge about the physiology, anatomy, how the body works, not necessarily knowledge about behavior and how people work, but how the body works. And in that significant knowledge, is able to wield significant influence over people who've lost that knowledge, who've forgotten that knowledge. So again, that skill set is somewhat higher than the lawyers, and then the PhDs don't have the exact like applicable skill sets. If somebody's on a plane and say, "Oh, we need a doctor," like PhDs, they don't have the qualification to do that. Doing contracts and making arguments in a court, like some PhDs can do that. That's not the skill set of the PhDs. But the PhDs are like they're like the higher, like all these three categories are like the priestly caste. Kind of sort of. I mean, lawyers are kind of like quasi priest, quasi kings. And again, looking at the Varnas from India, there's the field workers, the clerical white collar workers, then the kings and princes and government officials, and then there's the priests. That's the basic four Varnas from India. And so in that fourfecta, the lawyers would be about right here, Kshatriyas, kings. Although in the separation of church and state, it gets a little in the Western parlance, it gets a little bit hazy. But from and again, the lawyers are the gatekeepers, like the official gatekeepers. I'm tripping up on these official declarations because I'll say formal, because in many ways that's accurate. Again, policing, enforcement, and additionally, that's the purview of lawyers. However, it's the PhDs that are the gatekeepers of academia and who decide who gets in, who gets out, who's kept out. And those credentials of academia are the prerequisite for becoming a lawyer, becoming a doctor, and becoming a PhD. That's a lot of where the PhD power is wielded. Just recognizing, again, academia itself, the universities, being the front lines of apartheid within postmodern society. The class division, all the divisions of ethnicity being parlayed through this. Actually, I've said this recently, I think it was before the joint earlier today, but like just recognizing that academia is in the forefront of the experience of authoritarianism in Western civilization today. The policies being made, and additionally being made and substantiated, quote unquote, in reason through academic discourse, whether it's studies, professor opinions, and otherwise. All the potentates or whatever, generally speaking, are trained and confirmed through university, meaning each one goes through basically having a university degree. Politicians, lawyers, bankers, and everything else like that. All the despots, all the military commanders, and additionally, are trained through academia, and so regardless of what side they're on, they go through the same universities and read and study much of the same material from the same authors. Generally speaking, there's some variance, obviously, from place to place, spot to spot, but academia is wielding much of the power of conventional civilizational authority. and the PhDs are the ones that are running. And the thing about the PhDs is that, there's in business school at bottom just part. In business school, we learn about the five forces, and I made reference to this before, and don't know if this is actually one of the five forces, but barriers to entry, threats, competition, substitutions, da 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 da. There's a number of different things. There's Porter's five forces and something or other, but in one of those formulas, barriers to entry is a significant component of just understanding an industry and understanding an element of commerce. So, in understanding authority, barriers to entry, there's different barriers to entry to becoming a lawyer, to becoming a doctor, and to becoming a PhD. Um, so. One of the barriers to entry of just like is how lawyers communicate. People refer to it as lawyerese, knowing like the definitions of Latin terms, which is significantly within law, within English, whereas at least Western civilizational law, Roman Empire. Um, so lawyerese. Many people I think have heard about that and are familiar with that. When things sound so technical and like, why you trying to sound so complicated? Lawyerese. Now the doctors have another way of communicating, which is a barrier to entry and like a communication that requires decoding for many. And the way that lawyers communicate is through, again, chemistry, knowledge of the periodic table, um, um, drugs, drug terminologies, and additionally, and a lot of the foundation of the language of doctors is Greek, um, and so that's further in depth in terms of the civilizational rootedness of the art, of the craft, which is also less accessible. So that's the realms of the doctors. Now the realms of the PhDs. People can actually generally understand the words that PhDs are communicating. I mean, PhDs can delve into the Greek and delve into the Roman too. Um, there's an increasing amount of internationality concerning PhDs. It's increasingly recent and contemporary, and thus affected and influenced by globalization, particularly from the East, India and China. So the terminologies come from these religiosities as well. Um, the thing about the PhDs is is this. It's very convoluted. It's subliminal because PhDs utilize words that people generally understand, but at the same time are homonymous, that have double meanings and understandings and interpretations and nuances. So somebody might read the surface of what a PhD is communicating and think they have a general understanding of what the gist of it might be saying. Um, Yet in actuality, like when it's like understood the different nuances, the politics, where it's coming from, what school of thought and politics is coming from, that one sentence can be interpreted in like five and further types of ways, and it requires further like who wrote this, where did it come from, what's the context, and that becomes not just a language but an entire like discourse that is exclusive to others because people don't have the training. Many people don't have the training of knowing how to interpret things that they're looking right plain at. What's an example? We're gonna skip on that at the moment because it's 2000 hours at the moment, and we got only so much Soleil had yet to eat today, and ain't getting to detail. Recorded a 2-hour joint earlier, so it's a beneficial question about what's an example of that type of articulation. Um, what in the meanwhile, what I'll share with you is this: one of the exam questions that we learn in middle school towards getting a PhD, which is this: how now, brown cow? Blah blah. Interpret that one. You think you know what it's saying? How now, brown cow? That's a silly children's thing. Okay, interesting. Oh, wait a minute. Is that quoted? Is there something? I don't know. That's part of it too. Anyways, PhDs communicate in ways that people think they know what they're talking about, but they don't know what they're talking about, and that's the audience thinking that they know what the PhDs are talking about, and they don't. Meanwhile, PhDs are saying things to each other about policy, about recommendations for public policy, government policy, and additionally, and it's a lot of exclusionariism, references, mutual references back and forth of studies of substantiation and publications and everything else like that in the culture. So, anyways, that's part of like the barriers and the that's part of the some of the characteristics of the PhDs, and tremendously influential at this moment. Um, these are the gatekeeping region of the overclass, or between the overclass and underclass. Then we get into the next sections. So above the PhDs are the pedophiles. Now again, obviously there's broke at pedophiles and everything else like that, but there's a culture of pedophilia that exists over the PhDs, and the culture of pedophilia, where the networks are, the rings are, um, the ones who are the landowners, and making decisions concerning what buildings are established, who resides, and who sets up shop in those buildings, affecting universities, expansion of universities, renovation of universities, policies of municipalities. I mean, the job market, and further, pedophilia culture is above academia in that respect, pulling strings in academia. Um, the infusion of LGBTQ sodomites within academic hierarchy and infrastructure is one of the allowances in like symptoms of the influence and pervasion of pedophilia culture. So, evidence. Open eyes. So there's that. Then above the pedophiles, there's the cannibals. And the cannibals like take it to a next level of eating, consuming. And it's not just like the cultic sacrifices of children from pedophilia rings. And I might sound like flippant and disrespectful in terms of just being matter of fact, or whatever else. I'm doing my best to communicate information, facts, and maintain concentration, because it requires a considerable amount of concentration just to articulate this. So, let alone observe it and evaluate it and further. So, the cannibalism is perhaps less prominent, or less numerous, perhaps is one way to describe it. Like, there's the understanding that cannibalism is a less, there are fewer people practicing cannibalism according to our estimations. Um, Actually, you know what? That's not actually. That's actually. It's arguable. It's arguable because there's levels, there's degrees of this. So I'll complete, like, giving a general description of what we're talking about in terms of behavior, and then we can do the comparisons or further evaluations from that accordingly. So pedophilia again is sexual exploitation of children, plain and simple, and that's actual sexual rape, to even just like advertisements, modeling of children, sexualization of children for other purposes, not necessarily direct intercourse. So that's pedophilia, and that pedophilia culture is rampant around Western civilization at this very moment. You can go online and just advertisements for clothing, youth, even beyond teenage, 12, 11, 10-year-olds, dancing, swimsuit modeling, and otherwise. It's pervasive, legal, normalized, oftentimes thought of as cute or otherwise. It's pervasive. It's not. There's a difference between being pervasive and perverted. It is perverted. It's not even perverted. Is not the question. We can talk about degeneration, degenerative. That's the further consideration. It's less a matter of like, oh, that's weird. Oh, that's no. That's actually detrimental to life. It's detrimental to family life and healthy, the societal regeneration. It's detrimental to that, so it's degenerative. But what I'm saying is that it's pervasive, meaning that it's around. It's all around. So, anyways, That's the general pedophilia, and again, it translates into a culture, not just not just individual acts. Um, it's not just individual acts here and there or networks that are acting. It's an entire culture of corruption that affects everybody within the culture, even if they're not doing, even if they're not looking, even if they don't know, it still affects kinfolk, because it translates into norms of what's allowable, what's not allowable, and it affects relationships across the board. So that's pedophilia culture. Now, amidst that, there's the cannibalism. So when we talk about cannibalism, we're talking about, yes, the cultic, the cult, sacrificing of people, sacrificing of children, eating people, like the indigenous no contact kinfolk eating other no indigenous no contact kinfolk, or tourists who are doing wildlife vacationing or whatever and get caught up in nasty stuff. That's part of cannibalism. That's just part of it. When we talk about regular civilization, Western, Eastern, whatever, Southern, Northern, what we're talking about is the further systemic practice of it, those elements of actual human sacrifice. But what is of greater concern, or what is of great concern, is the regularization, the normalization of the harvesting of organs, human organs, for other people to live. And some of it is quote unquote voluntary. Official status in the state of Ohio, when people are getting a driver's license, is the question, would you like to be an organ donor? That's not just idle information. There are people many people with much money who have a great need for organs, because it's a sedentary lifestyle. The body is eroding, and so the young people who are poor and healthy in terms of their body and strong, particularly black bodies, that are devalued and too often done up, prime candidates for being donors. So it's a nasty business. That's cannibalism, but it's not looked at by many people as cannibalism. It's looked at as just, oh, that's such a beautiful thing to do, such a testimony to that person's life. That's the pimp talk right there. It is the eating, the consuming of another person's physical being to the detriment of that physical being for somebody else. Blood donations, that's cannibalism. People talk about the imaginary fantasy thing of vampires and whatever else. Blood donation. We don't have to get into the sensationalism of calling it vampires or whatever else, but blood donation itself is cannibalism. Not to eat the blood, just because it's not consumed through the mouth, it's still being ingested within another person's body, and that's cannibalism. That's actually contrary to traditional teachings of religiosities. However, again, it's the rationalization and the pimp talk that convolutes things into being accepted, acquiesced into normalization. So cannibalism itself is pervasive. It's high business, high stakes business. University hospitals. The name of one here is called University Hospital. Hospitals in the medical industry. That's huge business. And then talking about human trafficking. So I won't go into all the details of that. But cannibalism is further pervasive than what seems many people recognize or want to talk about. And it is the next step above pedophilia in terms of the worldly power element or whatever. And then above that's the cultish. The cultish are the cult or the occult are the ones who have some knowledge about the spirituality and some autonomy from the other hierarchies, and so navigate that realm of the overclass, and may be involved in human sacrifice, cannibalism, may be involved in pedophilia, may be involved in other elements as well. Where the religiosities fit in with this is like across the board. There's the realm of religiosity is in from top to bottom, from bottom to top, um, and evolved in all of the spheres of everything mentioned here, in one way or another. So, anyways, that's some that was some of the joint from before. The additional component, the additional category of being or membership within civilization is actually the an essential component that keeps the whole thing going, and that's children. And the thing about it is as a terse way of looking at a rough draft of this kind of dissertation of this presentation or whatever, is like where the children fit on that hierarchy, top, bottom, or wherever. So in actuality, what it is this, something to this effect. Rather than it being a linear kind of situation, when there's the inclusion and the recognition of the category of children, that's what keeps it going, and it changes the shape rather than this to that, from top to bottom, bottom to top. Children are at the top and children are at the bottom, and it becomes like a food chain type of thing, where at the bottom, children, then slaves, prisoners, workers, business, lawyers, doctors, PhDs, pedophiles, cannibals, cult, and the satanic. Children being at the bottom, underneath the slaves, and at the same time, children being above the satanic and the cult, and it becomes a circle at that point, a circular food chain. So one might say, recognize in certain ways how slaves might feed from children, and at the same time, there's a certain awakening in recognizing how children feed from the cult and from the satanic. So the point for sharing this is for understanding, and for with that understanding, to encourage discipline and to encourage through that discipline well-being of all beings. To have greater patience in dealing with the challenges that come from each of the components. When we talk about the ascetic, like the sadhu, the one, there's the outside category. If we look at underclass and overclass, there's an outclass as well. There's a third out off the grid component, a third off the grid category of being, which is again the sadhu, the ascetic, the one who leaves society. The wilderness itself is outside of this paradigm, and the sadhu, the one who leaves civilization, exists amidst wilderness and civilization, but as an outsider. So part of that process of being the ascetic, the monk, and otherwise living in the cave, the hira. Part of that process is letting go of the benefits that come from civilization, and the attachments and otherwise. So easier said than done. Yet that's what it is, and many do it. Many are doing it at this very moment. And one might say, well, everybody's attached to civilization. You can't just, well, a tree is attached to civilization as well. But at the same time, we don't readily include trees within demographics and otherwise, generally speaking. So there's always a relationship. Everything is everything. That's all the relations in the native heritage. And that also brings to mind the medicine and the mathematics, the wheel, which reminds one of one of the recent videos that we observed, the former president, the presidential candidate Donald Trump, references the wall between the land claimed as the United States, the land claimed as Mexico, the land of the Diné and the Aztec and Apache, and additionally, Tongva and further. So, in that address, it looked like a recent political campaign speech. He talks about wheels and walls, those being like two things that are continually relevant within the experience of civilization. And the thing about it is, there's legitimacy within that. Like, that's difficult to argue against that. And one, uh, at the very least, he's not talking about dropping bombs. He's not talking about like completely obliterating a combative post, a square mile, and making it look like the moon, which is some other recent videos I observed the U.S. military doing. So he's not saying that. We're talking about a wall. The wall is not violent. It may be racist and classist and everything else like that, but it's not violent. So it's beneficial to be mindful of that, about where one places one's hostilities and protests or whatever else. Walls are actually very beneficial in many ways, apply to many ways of keeping out threats and challenges to a community. Walls are very legitimate. Wheels are legitimate too. So it's difficult to argue against that. Now, the consideration is how those walls are applied and how those wheels are applied. So, the construction of a wall between the land claimed by Mexico and the land claimed by the United States, we're not involved in politics. We're not citizens of the United States or Mexico. So we have less concerns about like presidential candidates or whatever else. But in terms of society, you know, kinfolk have some demand for keeping walls. Well, we'll put it like this. The logic that's described, the reason for the wall between Mexico and the United States, or at least the project for the wall, is the concerns about economics, jobs, job security, the prevention of unwanted immigrants taking jobs. There's some, it seems to be some also talk about security of families, and additionally in terms of perhaps drug cartels or otherwise. But generally, the main thing that we hear about is jobs, taking away labor, this and the other, and adversely influencing local economic markets and otherwise. So there's certain reason for that too. We see certain legitimacy. However, at the same time, what we also recognize is, again, human trafficking, not just across borders in that respect, where involving walls. We're talking about domestic-based, homegrown pedophilia, homegrown sex trafficking of children and women and men. And the consideration is, what walls do Brethren Trump or anybody else propose to protect against those type of predators and those types of threats, domestic-born threats? What walls are suggested for that defense and for the well-being of children and women and the vulnerable within the domestic experience of the United States? Walls that protect people from the Jeffrey Epsteins and the Joe Bidens and the Bill Clintons and the Kamala Harris and the Donald Trumps of society. What are the suggestions for those walls? And even further, recognizing the legitimacy of walls and the importance of walls to protect the well-being of kinfolk within society. Then we can just apply that logic to the leading causes of death within the United States and entertain the proposals for walls to protect against those leading causes of death. Car accidents. What walls do kinfolk suggest to construct to protect life against one of the leading causes of death within the United States? Car accidents. What walls are being proposed? One thinks of bumper bowling and alleys, how that applies to streets, whatever. It's silly, but that's how ridiculous the situation is at the moment. I can explain less what I'm talking about right now in terms of bumper bowling, but that's just the concept that occurs. Anyways, and to be honest, that's perhaps like the children's voice emerging, of like looking at bowling alleys and lanes and thinking about how to provide safety and rather than people falling into the gutters, like the bowling ball on a bowling alley, doing bumpers. But how does that apply to the streets? The concept is understood. the application is a little bit, there seems to be further steps, but one simple thing, we think about car bumpers as well, but one simple thing is like to reduce the amount of vehicles on the streets. So applying that concept of safety from the bumper bowling to the streets in terms of applying, slowing it down and making it fewer in terms of the traffic and thus the number of accidents. But anyways, whatever that wall is, it most likely isn't going to look like the Great Wall of China between Mexico and the United States. But looking at in terms of other types of policy and regulation concerning the utilization of vehicles, but that wall, the United States needs that wall. And let's look at some of those other leading causes of death in the United States. Suicide, where the walls that kinfolk suggest to protect kinfolk against that leading cause of death of suicide within the United States. Serious facts, legit. 100. Rah, rah, rah. Heart disease. What are the walls that are suggested to protect people away from heart disease? Lung affections. Other chronic diseases of diabetes and otherwise through self-afflicting behavior. What walls do kinfolk propose to protect the well-being of people from those threats, from people's own selves? What are the walls? From the devil's screen, what are the walls that people propose to protect people from the devil's screen, from people's own selves? Again, it's simple logic, looking at the biggest threats to life in the United States alone. Don't seem to be like spending however billions or whatever on a wall, a physical wall between Mexico and the United States. That might help in the geopolitical military kind of thing, of stemming off plans of invasion from Mexico, whose borders might be further amenable to the entry of foreign elements, quote unquote, like Russia or China or Arabia or India or France or England or the United States itself, foreigners. So there is that recognition. Canada has a much larger border, but Canada also has a further alliance and cultural kind of homogeneity with anyway, blah 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 blah. That's part of the consideration. Viewed videos recently. Oh yeah, I gotta speak on this, but before I do, we'll pause for a second. All right, so I view further portion of one of the Roots podcast, and again, this is not intended as shade or hate or disrespect to the kinfolk who convene that, or to the kinfolk who participate on it. But to be honest, what we observe is like the exact. It's somewhat of a it's a hyperbole. But it's difficult at the moment to find another way of articulating. But basically, the exact opposite of healthy multiculturalism. It looks like it, which is part of the danger and part of the challenge. And it's not even a frustration. It's actually it's just a warning of like it being the exact opposite of what healthy multiculturalism is, because it has people who are different ethnicities. It's people who are communicating in a way that's empathic to different cultures. But what is actually being communicated is a very subtle and intense theology of individualism that separates one from one's relations, It makes that experience, or communicates that experience as comparatively meaningless and less significant, and emphasizes a methodology and experience of assimilation within imperialism, uh, but with a further uh, a thicker coat of the appearance of multiculturalism, because it's not white people who are saying it explicitly and directly, um, even though it's being communicated in the English language, which is still a symptom of the imperialism. So, anyways, now I'll explain a little bit what I'm talking about. First, I'm going to give an example of what I shared before of a recording that is observed. The recording was actually from a couple of years ago, and it seems to be like during COVID. And so the recording is it's a video recording of a jazz performance of a song, Mo Better Blues. Don't remember who the artists are. It looked like it could be something out of like the Bay Area, California, land, the Tongva, and the Oleon, the Pomo. However, less less knowledgeable at the moment of the details. Remember that comparatively. It's difficult to remember that the details of that. However, the aesthetic of it is this: it's beige people, it's beige kinfolk, so different shades and comparatively lighter shades of beige. Some of the kinfolk have a phenotype that is increasingly seems Eurocentric. Bald heads too. A lot of the bald heads. So there's no identification of hair texture or otherwise. Those signifiers of ethnicity and otherwise. So it's like a culture of it's androgyny as well. That's another huge thing. It's a sterile multiculturalism of just beige bald heads. Can't tell necessarily the people are male or female, or what their actual geographic roots may be. But they're playing this music, and then also having the mask on. So there's that science religiosity that comes with at that moment, but at the same time, like part of the imperialism at this point. And the people are playing music, and it's jazz, and it's Mo Better Blues, a classic new jazz kind of standard from the early '90s. So it's 30 years old. So it's like, okay, they know the song, they're playing the notes in things, so the mechanics of it are similar, are very much part of jazz. You can recognize the tune and everything else like that. Now, whilst the kinfolk are bald head, beige, masks on except for the trumpeter and the saxophone player, which if it's that serious, then nobody should be playing it, and nobody should be without masks. But if it's okay for certain people to do it, then like it should be applied. Like the whole logic of that application of rules is spotty on the part of the scientists, because scientists don't have that skill set as much as lawyers do. But anyways, it's inconsistent, and amidst an air of like just of severity, of like it's so serious that we have to do this, but at the same time it's inconsistent because we don't have to do it all the time. People already see that now very often. I'm hearing that years later, people saying like how much people are frustrated being lied to. Anyways, that's part of it. So in the midst of it, brethren, it looks like he has a leather coat on, so right there, predatory. Amidst all the safety and sterility and everything else like that, the androgyny, there's still predatoriness. We eat animals, we eat beings. So anyways, there's those elements, and then the way it's played, it's like it's just there's no feeling. It's like I said it before. It's like watching that hip hop group that does the Neptunes. Is it called the Neptunes? I don't. It's something like that. The new Neptunes, whatever. But just like robots, they're people. They're like regular people, but they look like robots because that's the air, that's the feeling, and that's not jazz. Jazz is about feeling. The rhythm section is just very still, very sterile. There's like no feeling, and that's not jazz. The rhythm section, the piano, the drums, the bass, that's where the foundation of it is. So the trumpets, the horns, build from that. So, and then even like in the extemporaneous part, like the trumpeter, who seems to be like the lead of the group, like is like feigning the aesthetics of trying to be down or whatever else like that, but like the whole gist of it is not it. So for him to do that, he's like, this is what people do when somebody's given their riff. It's like you're just like so formulaic, and so contrived. And that's not jazz. Jazz is exactly spontaneity and extemporaneousness and being on the spot. So that's exactly what, and it's, but it seems multiculturalism. Everybody there is beige. It could be Latino, could be mixed, black and white, could be Middle Eastern, could be European, could be a lot of different things. So isn't that, is that it could be Desi, could be East Asian or otherwise. Isn't that what multiculturalism is? No, it's not just boxes and demographics. So and actually, when it's endeavored to pretend or to take the place or to present itself as the epitome or the standard, that's when it becomes further troubling. And there's falsity within that, so there's less worry about it because there is no justice on this earth, and yet everything happens according to the will of the Most High. So, I mean, we have to temper our frustrations or whatever else and just focus on the truth and authenticity ourselves and recognizing that no weak art shall prosper. So there's that. Now, that being said, I can be accused of being racist or xenophobic or whatever concerning the criticisms here. But again, even before that, I share examples of people playing the same exact song who are Lily White from Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, the Prague Orchestra. Now, it was during the intermission, and so that's a little bit of a challenging thing of just like it being like somewhat of a side thing, but still there. In the middle of Europe, Prague. Cats probably don't even speak English. No Mo Better Blues, or don't speak English too tough or too voluntarily. No Mo Better Blues. Not only that, do it. First of all, pay respects. They show imagery from the film, so they're acknowledging who's doing it. That's jazz. That's hip hop. We give props to those who come before us and respect. African Bambata and otherwise. So that's an example from hip hop. So that's what the brethren from the Czech Republic do. They say, this is Mo Better Blues. Here's who does it. They show the people from the film. So there's the imagery, like this is coming from African kinfolk, and this is where we get it from. But at the same time, they're playing the notes, but at the same time, they're doing it. The rhythm section is feeling it. The saxophone from the beginning is like, oh, okay, I see you. They're putting their foot in it. They're making it their own by studying and learning and going through the process, and then saying like, but this is our flavor too. This is how we do it. That's what jazz is. The same thing, and it's lily white kinfolk doing it. Now, some black folk might call me out and challenge me on that, and we can reason about that. However, that's in comparison to what we saw from the sterile androgynous beige. The beige ain't it. The androgynous sterile beige ain't it. In terms of multiculturalism, the all white Czech kinfolk playing Mo Better Blues. That's it. Not only that, Japan, the Tokyo Jazz Fusion Ensemble, does the same song, a rendering of the same song a year or so ago, and got funky nasty with it. And I call the brethren Frizzy Gillespie. Straight up Japanese. Don't even know how much English he speaks. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Jazz, brethren. Jazz don't speak English. How about that? But when you listen to that rendering of it, you feel it. You feel it. You feel it. Whether you want to or not, you feel it. Whether you want to admit it or not, you feel it. That's what jazz is. And you can see, they don't even said a word, but you can tell they study, they respect. They may not have the images, they might not put the film up there, but you can tell by the way the brethren play, they're paying their respects. That's what jazz is. It's not the androgynous beiging of imperialism. So, anyways, that being said, going on to what we observe in terms of the intercultural roots and roots. Now, what this is an increasingly intellectual way, and I like I said, I spent 2 hours doing this joint before, in addition to some other things. So, the intention is not to do. Availability is even not to necessarily to do it the same way. Oh, and it got stopped up because the countdown got too low. We went too low in the limbo poll thing in terms of the memory on the hard drive. So because of that, it just didn't take by the time we finished the recording. There might be a way of retrieving it that's beyond my skill set at the moment, so we just redo it. So that's what this is. So in the episode I watched, again, this is the one where the sister is talking about having a quarter life crisis, going through the standard path university, worked in finance for 5 6 years, and then decided to do something else. Didn't watch the whole thing, so have yet to hear, and may not, because I don't. I'm staying away from watching it at this point because of what I'm describing here now. And it's no hate. It's no hate on either of the kinfolk. Beautiful kinfolk, intelligent kinfolk. We understand they're doing their best, but at the same time, we have to recognize and acknowledge and let it be known that it's not it, and it's actually detrimental. It's not completely altogether detrimental, but the detriments outweigh the benefits in our estimation, our humble estimation. And we're willing to reason about this as well, but it's important to acknowledge because it's less obvious, and particularly for younger kindred kinfolk. It's beneficial to articulate this so that when people are making decisions, um, people can make it accordingly. Now, first to begin with, we're going to emphasize again, like university itself is not it. Academia itself is not it. Academia is actually a pitfall. And we're not hating on, we love learning, we love education, and we have experience in academia. And some of our fondest memories, our most fondest memories, aside, well, even including our experiences as a family, many of our fondest memories are being in university, being in the school environment, and meeting kinfolk from different backgrounds, and additionally, and developing meaningful relationships that continue to this day. So it's not just some categorical lambasting of academia and universities, but at this point, what we recognize from life experience and also from the evolution of civilization in the past few decades, academia is the bastion of apartheid, and um, uh, it is a mechanism for um, employing imperialism. I mean, it's like the front office of imperialism in many ways. Uh, so it's the administration building of imperialism. Uh, so that's the context that we're describing this situation with the podcast, because the podcast is based significantly within the culture of academia. So part of the outline is, I guess I'll do like a brief outline of the gist of the response, and then maybe get into some of the details. Perhaps we got beans cooking on the oven, so this ain't the Jeffersons, but it is the situation. Um, Beans don't burn in the kitchen, something, whatever. It's not worth remembering the theme song to Jefferson's. If anything, if somebody's a fan of um, his name, um, wow, his name escapes me now. But the actor who plays George Jefferson. He also plays Deacon. Is it Deacon Fry on Amen? So that's we if we're gonna memorize the theme song to a television show that features that particular actor rather than it being the Jeffersons, we offer Amen as a further positive example. And the lyrics to that song go something like this. And here we go. We got a sing song, a sidetracking sing song. Here we go. I don't know if I'll do the whole thing. It's been a while. I'm out of practice with my singing, so there ain't no guarantee what it's gonna be. But it's spontaneity. Hey. Turn on the light forevermore, shine on me. Turn on the light forevermore, shine on me, shine on me, shine on me, shine on me. Put me on the path and let me find my way. Let me find my way. Turn on the light forevermore. Shine on me, shine on me, shine on me, shine on me. Somewhat adapted lyrics, but that's the basic gist. True to the core, true to the spirit. Um, Singing is like gymnastics. It's like dancing. You got to get the footwork, and additionally, um, and then learn the pattern. So the songs, the lyrics are the pattern. Singing on key, that's the footwork. So a little bit off key, the footwork a little bit rusty. So anyway, there it is. For being out of practice, and is it a double flip? I wouldn't say that, but anyway, the trees are waving. It might be the breeze though. It might not just be me. Or easy. Continuing on, we're talking about we're talking about the podcast, and we're talking about the synopsis of the conversation. The synopsis is basically the sister was talking about her experience. She's an immigrant. She grows up not feeling belonging in any particular community. Going to university, that's what she's conditioned, or that's what she's guided to do. And she very much appreciates her experience at university. She finds herself increasingly finds kinfolk, and then continues on to work in finance, and presumably that's where the conversation continues, where she becomes dissatisfied with her job, quits finance, and does something else. So that seems to be what the crux of the conversation gets into. Didn't listen to that much, because once she starts talking about her university experience, had to stop listening. Because again, being with these gray hairs and this experience, and the elder status or elder-like status, you can't just be listening to kinfolk without contributing, and just absorbing. Like we've completed our lecture stage. We're still in the brahmacharya, but we've completed that lecture stage, which is listening, particularly when it's kinfolk who are half our age or otherwise. So half, maybe a little bit older than half, but anyway, still. I'm still in my 40s. I got about 20 days to be in my 40s. Anyway, all right. That don't mean I can't stop acting young. Continuing on. So we didn't watch the rest of it in terms of the substance of what actually draws us into listening to it to begin with, talking about that decision, that Peter Maritzburg moment for the sister. And Peter Maritzburg is a reference to the sign, at least in the film, and it might have actually happened, but at least in the film, for Gandhi, when he's in the first class coach on his way from Durban or someplace to like Johannesburg, and he's thrown off the train because we don't allow coloreds or blacks on the train in first class, and he refuses to leave. He's got his first class ticket from the mail, but then he learns, oh wait a minute, they don't like me. So, and she's not necessarily describing that particular scenario of like racism or whatever else, but it's like that existential recognition, like the imperial path that I'm doing right now is not it. I have to find something else. And some people would just find an alternative imperial path. I mean, it's understandable, but at the same time, it's beneficial for to have that conversation and to relate with people additionally. However, at the same time, it's also beneficial and necessary to recognize that substituting one imperialism for another without acknowledging it is further detrimental. So that's what we're doing here, is just like calling things out. And it's not necessarily, can't critique or speak, evaluate or whatever about her decision, because have yet even listened to that part of the narrative. But it's this part, which is like a foundational part, that's applicable to hundreds of millions of people at this moment. Actually, yes. That we're addressing it. So the challenge is this. When first she talks about being an immigrant, being from, I'm trying not to be too specific about ethnicity or whatever, so because this is a universal experience. She talks about going from one country to another, and therefore not feeling belonging in either country. Not necessarily being mixed. She's not claiming a mixed identity, but not feeling belonging in either one, because going back to her home country, she's looked at as a foreigner because her ways are different, and then being in the other country, she's looked at a foreigner because of her ethnicity, her phenotype, and additionally, and so there's that, again, that third culture kid, I guess, is what the experience is. That's one thing, and that's what she experiences growing up in her home, and additionally, not necessarily in her house with her family, but around herself, with the kinfolk around her at that moment. So she talks about going to university, and that's the people's dream. That's what people are conditioned and programmed to buy into. It's like, okay, just university. I'm very much from that experience myself, going through the hellish experiences of high school, with that notion of university is going to be better. And in many ways, for myself, university is way, I won't say better, I'll say university is way further pleasurable in terms of, like, it was like a dream experience. Literally like a dream experience. That's another story. That's not about me at the moment. So she talks about getting to university, and she goes to an elite university. So right there, that's giving her credentials into the conversation with the Brother and the podcast, because she went to elite. She goes to an elite university. She has that credential and that marketability for clicks within that academic culture. So that's one of the signifiers. Then in at that university experience, she talks about like being in the classroom, and she communicates an ideology, a philosophy, or even a theology at that point, where she says that everything that people, every place where people come from before that is like out the door, and it's just everybody's like on the same level in the classroom. Everybody's a student. Everybody's sitting in the seats. Everybody's talking with each other, and this and the other. That's a nice idea, but it's actually, I think, somewhat of I won't say necessarily a naivete, but somewhat of an exaggeration, or somewhat of an illusion, perhaps, because for some people it might be that, but generally speaking, for those people who it is for, who like just like, oh, we've arrived, and additionally, those are generally the kinfolk that haven't been groomed to be in that. How put it? That's not accurate. Don't have the pedigree of generations of being in that room beforehand, because the people who for whom is basically a given, like or maybe even like falling down some steps from what was supposed to be for them, they know the realm outside, and they still have allegiance outside, and they see the classroom. Okay, this is just a per forma kind of situation. I'll go through the motions of socializing, whatever else, but their life and their priorities and their allegiances and their prospects are outside the classroom. So when kinfolk are coming from an experience of perhaps less of the delusion of privilege, to be in that room, it's just like, oh, we're all here, da 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 da, and it feels like this is it. When for others, it's not, and they don't say that too much, but it's not. So there's a leverage. There's a leverage of relationship and otherwise accordingly, because some people give it their all. And in many ways I do. I won't say give it my all, but I give much of myself in that experience, whereas others are just like, I'm just here to get the credential and then go back here to my kinfolk, my trust fund, or whatever else. So yeah, what do you got to say? This, that, and the other. Okay, pass and go. Anyways, that's part of the harshness of the culture, and it's cold-blooded. It is what it is. Soybeans are going to be burning if I keep on talking longer without attending. So, all right, let's expedite. So that's one thing about giving oneself, because the important thing is, like she's saying, like it didn't matter what background people came from, what ethnicity, what language, how much money, or whatever else. Everybody was equal in the classroom, and that's something that I think a lot of people want to feel. A lot of students want to feel that. A lot of students want to believe that, but it's a very dangerous theology to buy, because what it is doing is it's soliciting people to give, to forsake where they come from, forsake parents, family, culture, language, heritage, tradition, customs, in order to emphasize one's existence in the classroom, in the room of the quote-unquote, well, we're not going to call it privilege, the Ivy Towers, or elitism. We'll call it elitism, to like just value so much one's involvement and acceptance within the elite thing, and like having access to leaders and shakers, movers of society, world society, as evidence of, like, you have arrived. You are on the stage. Congratulations, you're special. And then valuing oneself because of that. But when one values oneself because of that significantly, at the cost of devaluing the other components of one's being, the relationships, the heritage, and otherwise, one becomes further dependent upon staying in that room and appeasing the people who make decisions about who stays and who doesn't. And that's where things become further trepidatious. So that's applicable, that word. And that's what we're warning kinfolk concerning. That culture and that trope of just presuming solidarity within elitism. It's a recruitment ploy for others. So she goes further on to describe like getting involved with a cultural group that does a specific type of music that is unique to a particular region, a particular geography, a particular culture, a particular ethnic group. And she mentions, like, again, very emphatically, that it didn't matter what background we were, as long as we were just practicing the culture and doing that, that's what mattered. And it was a beautiful thing. So at that, again, she's talking about the aesthetic, and it's like cultural prostitution of, like, it doesn't matter, like, who the person is, whatever. Like, we had sex, and it was enjoyable, and I felt better doing it. I felt much better relaxed, and that's all that mattered. That's the equivalent of talking about culture in that respect. It very much matters. It very much matters who's doing it, and the knowledge, knowing where it comes from, speaking the language it comes from, respecting and honoring the people, respecting and honoring the customs, where that culture comes from. It's gonna happen one way or the other. So that notion of it's like that blind multiculturalism that says it doesn't matter where we're from, we're all the same. That's actually very dangerous. That's very dangerous, because true multiculturalism, pluralism, true connection is exactly knowledgeable about the others. Um, to different, I mean, to varying degrees, but it very much matters who people are, where people come from. It matters to get the name right. It does matter. It's difficult, and we don't have to get the name right exactly at that moment. Learn and respect and be modest in that process. But it's not just a matter of saying Jawaharlal and say, oh, Jawaharlal, how do you spell? How about we just say Jay? We'll call you Jay. Doesn't matter what your name is. Doesn't matter where you come from. You're with us now. Jay. We'll call you Jay. We love you, Jay. What do you say, Jay? No, that's not it. It's Jamal. It's Jawaharlal. And I'm trying to say that as accurate and authentic as possible. But that's what it is. So that notion of it doesn't matter where we come from. We just do what we do. Or we do what you do. No. That's not it. And that's dangerous. Really. The lights went out. Lights out. Uh-huh. Dance, dance, dance. What does that matter? What is that? I don't know. It did affect the light, though. It did affect the light. Electricity, light, the radiation and pollution, water. All right. The sensitivities of the double screen. Continuing on, we got food cooking, yeah? Well, we got the rice off, so that's decent. But them soybeans, we're supposed to bake them. We're boiling bacon. We're trying this for the first time because we ain't been soaking. And it's not going into the tofu at this moment, so we're just working with the soybeans proper. Continuing on. And again, this is not shade to the sister nor the brethren from the podcast. This is just articulation. We're ready to reason and respect and additionally, but we'll see who's receptive and who's receiving. But for the moment, we put this into the ether. And so that's some of it. So yeah, that's one of the things that's triggering right now is cultural prostitution. Even when kinfolk are doing it with their own culture and being hired to teach and share and have parties with people from their own culture, phrase that further accurately, when people who are knowledgeable about their own culture, specialists, and I can speak from an African experience, the drum on this continent had literally cut hands, severed hands, torture for somebody to carry a drum, because the slave owners, the slave imperialists, the enslaving imperialists knew that the drum, the powers of the drum, communication, lifting up spirit, lifting up energy, emboldening slaves to not acquiesce to the whip or otherwise, and rise up. The kinfolk know the power of the drum, and for that reason, any brethren, African brethren, who went into the forest, cut down a tree, took one of those goats and made a drum, and played the drum. What up? Cut off hands. What up? Cut off necks. Torture and death for playing the drum. Hundreds of years of that, so that fear of even playing the drum, so that even when kinfolk are bumping now, it better not be the acoustic, organic drum. It better be these electronic drums that we can shut down whenever we want. Slave. I listen to electronic issued music myself, but just acknowledging what the actuality is. So, point is, the culture of peoples, African peoples particularly on this land, has been severely punished for many generations, to the point where kinfolk are don't even want to talk about it, don't even want to admit it. Black kinfolk don't want to admit it because it's just so fearful of the eventual punishment. And in me playing the drum here today meaning these days, we get the threats. Literally, it's the innocuous smiling threats most often, but it's still conjuring that history and that precedent of torture and death for simply playing the drum. So when we see the drum circles nearby with kinfolk who are African, of African ancestry, and who have some knowledge about playing African drums, which is beautiful and sacred, and then in the drum circle we see all people of European ancestry and hardly any people of African ancestry, it's a party, and bring the children through and everything. It's cultural prostitution. Why? Because people are participating in that sacred experience of the drum circle, learning the authentic rhythms of Africa, from Senegal, the Wolof, the Ashanti, and further, learning those authentic rhythms that have been stolen and punished by African people today who don't know them and are too scared to learn them. But they're being shared by this children and practitioners of imperialism as party. This is our opportunity to let our hair down and kick it and be liberal. Da 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 da. Why are you hating? Just join the party. It's prostitution. That's sex. That's sex without commitment. It's not attachment and commitment to the well-being of kinfolk. It's not saying, oh, you know what, we should probably give everybody of African ancestry a drum before we play it ourselves, because there has yet to be the reconciliation from the past, and we're still inheriting the benefits, the monies, the infrastructure, and additionally, so this party is cultural prostitution. So that's part of the symptom and the outcome. When people talk about, it doesn't matter, we're all just this, let's just appreciate everybody for what they are without actually knowing who they are. I like the rhythm, I like the drum, I like how it feels. Yeah, exactly. It's medicine, it's sacred, it's powerful. Exactly, we know. Oh, I like this sex, I like how she feels. Yeah, we know. But you have to commit to her and provide for her for life. Oh, I just like it for tonight. Once a week, maybe. Oh, you want me to pay? This was free. Wasn't this subsidized by the company? Am I talking about culture? Am I talking about prostitution now? Exactly. Anyway, so when the sister, and she's not talking about that per se. Actually, it is, because she was talking a different rendering of that, about joining a cultural group at the university. And it probably has the nicest instruments, most quality instruments, and some expert who provides. It's an elite university, so they got money, and money motivates people, particularly people with authentic knowledge, to share that. And so they got the credentials in that respect, but they're not committing necessarily to the culture, to the people, to the history, to the ways of being, to the rituals, and otherwise. It's just like, yo, we like this way the drums sound. Yo, yeah, things get stirred up. We want to get it done. We know. Amidst a culture of sterility and stagnation, it's extremely lucrative to stir it up. Exactly, we know. It's medicine. And too much of it is abusive. And not respecting it and honoring it is detrimental, inadvisable, unsustainable. So anyways, that's what we're talking about. So that's part of what we're talking about when she articulates, and she's just, millions of people say that. We don't have to, what is it? It doesn't matter where we're from, like we all have it. That sentiment is near to the accuracy and to the legitimacy, but at the same time, it's way off. It's tangential. It's asymptotic. And essentially, it's if not a 180, it's a 175 degree. It's exact opposite, because what is important is us getting along. And additionally, and in order to genuinely, honestly get along, we have to know each other. When we say we don't have to know each other, we don't have, it doesn't matter where we're from, that's shirking the responsibility of doing a research about each other. And again, applying it to the relationship between a man and woman, meeting meeting a woman in a club. Well, it doesn't matter what your name is. It just matters as long as we have sex and enjoy each other and respect each other and like leave accordingly. Because that's what happens at university. People find these things and it's like, oh, this is a nice thing at university. Then they go back to their own ways or whatever, or get further into the imperialism, where again, as the sister was talking about, like I think she was talking about, maybe somebody else was talking about, but work, and that's it. So that's part of the cruise ship experience of university as well, where there are all these programs, there are all these opportunities, there are all these events, there are all these monies to do all these cultural celebrations and appropriations. So the appropriations for appropriation. Um, Quartermasters and quarter life crises. So, anyways, that's part of the joint there. Saw some of the Sneeko brethren commented about it already. Spiritual path is respected. The spiritual path is just a continuation of further pledge in life. Spiritual path. There's still questions. There's still challenges. There's still threats and temptations, even within the religiosities. There's corruption and greed, hatred, delusion, even within the hierarchy of religiosities that have knowledge. It just gets next level. One thing, bottom line is, near bottom line is like Sneeko brethren, particularly respecting it. I don't. I think I shared this before. I said two things earlier today, and I think also yesterday as I'm falling asleep, perhaps. So I see his content from years ago, maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, maybe. And as I talk about him and his communication, his conversation with Brother ABA and Preach. I don't know if I did that in the 2-hour one today or if that was yesterday. So without like reviewing all of that again, the bottom line at the moment is much of what he's valued for in terms of his audience and the service that he provides, that he emphasizes, particularly in that conversation about his spiritual path, and additionally, just recently, talking about going to Hajj and further, or at least going to Mecca. I don't know if it was Umrah or Hajj. Hajj is recently, a couple months ago. So, anyways, recognizing that, he talks about his businesses. Now, here's the thing for him, for consideration, is this. He recognizes, he says this himself about him being valued because he's honest, he's candid, and amidst all his quote unquote flip floppy or whatever, like he's honest about it. And even when the one thing being cautioned is like slowing up how much one says what's what when one is still like learning and admitting that. So that's one thing. But at the same time, he acknowledges that, and so even amidst his fumbles and foibles, he's being honest about it, and he puts himself on Front Street a lot. Seemingly, I don't watch a lot at this point. Don't watch a lot of the streaming or whatever. Don't watch a lot of the social media. So I'm basing it. I do watch a lot of the videos that he shares years ago. A lot of the conversations. Can see where his path is going at that point. Offered guidance at that point, but who listens to me? So now where he's at this moment, he seems to be further settled, to be honest, compared to what's observed in the past year and what I've seen from other content from other people. So there's appreciation. We give thanks and praise to the Most High for that. Alhamdulillah. Simultaneously, this is just the basic near bottom line kind of thing. He recognizes he's valued for being honest, but at the same time, at the moment, he's pushing this get rich thing. He's critical about system, but then that get rich thing is a trope that's very much system, and it becomes and that notion of like the proletariat libertarianism of like everybody can get this, just listen to me. Hold up, that's like gimmicky now. That's game right there. So that's not the point. The point is just to recognize that just facts, and I think this is easier to recognize. Facts is this: anybody who's rich is less honest. Just general facts. There's a certain what's it called, mutual exclusivity of truth and material wealth, and so when one is valued for being honest, and one is being compensated for being honest, to recognize just for oneself, pragmatics, that one, it's not necessarily one's got to go, but there's a limit for both, and Once loses the honesty, once one loses that integrity, like there's little compensation for it afterwards. So, in that process of establishing richness and material wealth, and additionally, to be mindful of that, because there's a legitimacy within establishing one's nest egg and getting ready to settle down, as he talks about doing, getting married and having children. So that's honorable, respected, supported. But at the same time, when it starts getting into that, like, get rich, not necessarily get rich quick, but get rich and listen to what we do, that's imposing, that's impinging upon the honesty side, and what is actually the foundation of what the brethren is celebrated for and supported for, by his audience, as he described. So, anyways, share that as a just a what's up, or whatever. That being said, also we'll share it on a similar note, like our emphasis of just a multicultural center, a mixed heritage retreat center, mixed heritage multicultural retreat center, a physical place where like the I don't say the experts, but like the hardcore committed, hardcore is a little bit charged word, the committed kinfolk, the leadership resides, and then the space where visitors ride, like a school, and they can study, retreat for like a weekend of just like programs and study, like somewhat in the fashion of like a Buddhist retreat that they do, that kinfolk do, we do, see do. All right. But something along those lines. It's a residence, so people live, the leadership live and sustain livelihood from that, and then people visit for a week, for a weekend, for a month, for a year, and it can become scholars and residents or otherwise. But the content, the subject is multiculturalism, particularly mixed heritage. Multilinguistic is the norm. Languages being spoken from all over, and it being a place, a sanctuary for people to be mixed, and a physical place that people can think about and meditate on, like, okay, yo, here's this, and here I want to go for that particular festival, or for that particular retreat, or for that particular lecture series, or otherwise. But it being a physical place, rather than just like the nebulous of the internet, and a safe place, a comfort, so that people can feel what it's like, for periods on end. To be mixed, to be accepted, to be supported, and as a norm, even just on that campus. It's a valuable experience, and that's coming from my experience of HBCU travels and otherwise. And it's very accessible. When Brethren Sneeko was talking about land acquisition, additionally recently, a retreat center is extremely accessible. If other than for one person, for a collective of people, investors, organizers, or otherwise, getting some land doesn't have to be so fancy. Whatever, a facility, a guest house, to begin with, or otherwise, and steps from there. So rural land, rural area, in the country, somewhat away from like the hubbub and everything, and also nature, trees and water, fresh air. Got to be careful of gunshots, because here in Ohio, at least this is where we're working, that's the tendency when we get into the country. Not just gunshots, automatic weapon fire, target practice, just to let you know. So anyways, maybe some distance from that, because that helps us to be further calm and just peaceful. Ain't hating on the kinfolk with the automatic gunfire. It's a different politics, and we reason with all brethren, and for all this, the supremacists and the supremists and nationalists and everything else like that, we reason and we find common ground. We honest. And we encourage kinfolk to be honest and recognize that there is common ground. It's called earth. But anyways, it's a whole nother spiel. So that's what we share with kinfolk at the moment. Multicultural center, multicultural, mixed heritage cultural center, and retreat center. Now, the thing about business is that when people have an idea, and when people have the means of implementing that idea, people are advised to be very careful about how they share it, because they can share an idea whose time has come, whose time is ripe. And when that idea is shared with people who have like immediate means, like of getting land yesterday, and putting a team together yesterday, putting teams together, making a franchise yesterday, having 20 of these joints around the world yesterday. I'm smelling the soybeans. Then for somebody who's like a small timer, who did all the research and life experience and everything else to put it together and put the idea together and put the mechanics of it together and everything else, like They don't have the means to actually do it exclusively independently. And then once they share the idea, what value do they have at this point? We know how to do it. We know the mechanics of it. We can ride with the aesthetic. That's the susceptibility. So I say all that whilst I'm saying all this, because not just that we're invincible or whatever else, but as I said before, that there isn't much of what we do and the efficacy of what we do is in the honesty. It's in the principles. It's in the ethics. You cannot steal fairness. You cannot steal sharing, and that's what we do. That's what we're known for doing. That's what we're supported for doing. So, and that's what we're doing with the multicultural joint. I got to check on the soybeans. If it's smoking, it ain't joking. If it's sticking, it means it's been stricken. The charcoal brown means you let it down. Yeah. Woks are amazing cooking instruments, very effective. And leaving a wok on medium high heat or whatever, and the top on, it gets it done. So sometimes we need to learn further. But that's the situation. Like the water evaporates even when having the cover on, and then when keeping the cover off, then the steam and the smoky. Anyways, talking about the land and ideas being stolen or whatever else. We share, and that you can't steal sharing, and it's not temptation. It's not ego. It's actually it's a humble appreciation to the grace of the Most High Elohim, and walking in the path, and recognizing when having gems, we got to share it. We have to. They can't be stolen. We got to be quick and thorough and judicious in giving them. But that's what we do. So when it comes to these ideas, we share it for whoever is interested to work with it as interested. Now, that's not our sanction and like stamp of approval, whatever, because how about some respect and how about some support and mutuality in that process? Because that's part of the honesty. So when kinfolks do have means to do it themselves, and additionally, wait, hold up, come on. How about some work, some reciprocity? Because that's what the table is, and that's what the table does. It is round. It's a round table. So we trust in honesty, and we trust in the ethics, and we have to be true to that. We have to live it for it to be effective, and to be supported for that, and to be to have indemnity amidst the betrayals. So even like stages of going through life, and like being at different precipices of projects, even with the Superior Road joint that we had this past year, whatever, and now other parties are involved. Like we have a very keen idea of what happens in that sequence of us identifying it as a point of interest, communicating it with some people, some of the reasons why and some of the intentionalities. And then when we do that, now it becomes active on the record. We're seeing transactions being done when we communicate an interest in it. And then now other people are involved in terms of that building's been dormant, vacant, abandoned, loitered for decades. Nothing's been happening. We communicated interest in it just a year or so ago, and then from that, now we see the paper trails of the activity right amidst that time. So, anyways, and we know scenarios about how it's done. Even people who are proximate with us, being facilitators of that, voluntarily or involuntarily. So, again, it's game, and it's part of the competition nature of city and civilization. So we have to recognize that we're not territorial. We don't have the means of competing. Much of the powers and support that we have is beyond that. So it's not a matter of saying lesser than or whatever, but we're not allowed to engage in those types of competitions or whatever. So we communicate something, and then we wait for kinfolk to acknowledge and provide the support accordingly. Sometimes it happens before we're ready, and sometimes it happens way, way, way in our waiting. So this retreat center, whatever, is just another situation in that. And the retreat center itself is an evolution of what we've been working on for years and years and years. Whether we call it a kutuhus, whether we call it a refugee camp, whether we call it an academy or otherwise, this is the rendering of it. It's a mutuality. We have to meet where people are ready. So, anyways, all that being said, we share the gist of it, and the kinfolk are already now active. Mixed kinfolk are on the scene around the world, doing things, and have the capacity of taking ideas like this and getting funding, getting backing, and getting it done. And then in doing that way, then people say, well, we've already seen all these retreat centers. Why do another one? However, again, we recognize the validity, the uniqueness within what we do. We are rooted within traditional practices, and that's not necessarily the gist of the retreat center itself, but that's part of what the backing is. Tobari Gokadao, Torah, Bhagavad Gita, Dikanakai, Dhammapada, Gospels, and Quran, and Dao Te Ching. A knowledge about this, a study of this, that's our rootedness. Then from that, then we have knowledge about the songs and stories of the world, the languages, methodologies for learning the languages, instruments, musicality, in expression. So there's the lightheartedness and the accessible content of our multiculturalism, organic and formulaic. So that's our repertoire, and that's something that it's extremely difficult. AI doesn't even have the capacity of imitating it or substituting, I should say. And again, the benefit of it is the feels. It's not just like the vibration and like the sensation. It's the well-being. It's the healing that is beyond the senses. It's spiritual. It's the spirits. It's the heavenly realm. It's the dreaming. It's our ancestors. It's our relations. It's nature. It's the trees. It's the plants. It's the insects. It's the birds. It's the experience. It's the sharing. That's the benefit we provide. And I ain't perfect. And there are ways in which I detract the benefit of the healing nature and the healing energy that I share by my own indiscretions and indulgences and otherwise. So ain't perfect and ain't invincible. But it's thorough. It's established. It's long time. And we continue with it. So in the meanwhile, we can share exactly what we're doing. Much like the PhDs giving their decoded whatever. That's a reduction of what we're talking about. But anyways, point is we can be very upfront, generally speaking. Now, when we get into the implementation stage, there are people who we work with who are not as transparent, and that's not a dig, that's not that shade. It's just facts. People are less comfortable being on Front Street, so in certain ways we have to like account and attend like kinfolk guests who visit, not necessarily all announcing and proclaiming everybody who visits or otherwise. So we find the balances and appropriate accommodations accordingly. Um, but the foundation um, is well established, and we give all thanks and praise to the Most High for everything by and by. Why oh why? Why oh why oh oh oh. All right. Um. So that's some of the experience. Also, point is that with the brethren like Sneeko and additionally, we say, let's chop it up about this retreat center situation. If you're in this realm of um, land stewardship and otherwise, here's a business opportunity. It's rather accessible, rather scalable, and otherwise. We're working here in Ohio. We know there are kinfolk in other places around the world. There are particular concentrated areas of mixed heritage populations and concentrated places of mixed heritage activity. Um, Japan, England, Singapore, Brazil, California, Tonga and Oleon, um, the Okanagan, Vancouver. There are many places, Hawaii, and further, where there's significant concentrations of significant populations of mixed heritage people, significant concentrations of mixed heritage activity, and further. So we just keep it at that. We've been at this over an hour and a half. Food already done, start burning. So it's beneficial to wrap this up. Anything else to share at this moment? I think we're still okay with the memory. Yeah, all right. Storage situation. It's not the most pleasant of things recording something for 2 hours and then it goes blah, 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 blah. But then at the same time, it's like, fine, I'll let it go. If it's important, it comes back. So whatever is important at this moment, it's here. What else? Anything else at the moment to share? Before I start going to sleep. One consideration was speaking about the cistern that I made a video about before. And to be honest, it is disrespectful. It is disrespectful. But there's reason, and there are occasions when we do disrespectful things to people who are being disrespectful. And it doesn't excuse disrespect, but there is reason for it. An example of this is going up to somebody, grabbing that person, and slamming them on the ground. That's not just disrespectful, that's immediately harmful. However, if that person is waving a gun or doing something threatening that precipitates being grabbed and thrown to the ground, then there's reason. It's still disrespectful to do that to the person, but there's reason. So when there's the image of the cistern, not necessarily quite half naked, but showing her pubic area, like a bikini. It's advertisement presumably for clothing, and there are photographs, big blown up photographs of a number of young kinfolk, like teenagers, young 20-somethings, a couple brethren, a couple sistren, and one of the sistren has on like a bikini kind of I don't know what it is, but it's something that shows the area around her vagina, even to the point where it's visible. You can see that where her pubic hairs have been shaved. So that's how graphic it is, how illicit it is, and it's right on the storefront window where everybody walks by: children, women, mothers, families, men, everybody. It's not the most heavily trafficked area in the village, but it's right there. Every time it's on my route to go to the library to upload and download and everything else. So my intent initially was to go there now and then record this now. However, less inclined. I'm still in grind mode in terms of completing this project. Not leaving here too tough. It's not a matter about dealing with The static on the streets at the moment, that's less of an issue. It's less of a priority one way or the other. Um, it is factored into it. It's just like other additional things to consider. But at the moment, like again, focusing on the project, completing that. That's what the priority is at this moment. So aside from that, not doing too much outside of that. Um, Nearing completion. Hallelujah. Alhamdulillah, Baruch Hashem, Jayom, Medo, Shishir, Om. Um, but still work to do, and thus, like taking a time out to go to even recording this is taking time out, 2 hours now, and to do it on the streets and it's not even concerned about like kinfolk. I was on the streets just 2 days ago to like 3 a.m. thereabouts, putting in my shift, doom scrolling at the Wi-Fi spot. So like it's not a matter of like fear or whatever else along those lines that people might accuse or be concerned about. um the whole like ego grandstanding or whatever else like that, it's like that's it's so what it's not, it's so what it's not. um However, at the same time, when kinfolk like speak to that or like work to that, it's like it has to be addressed at some point. So I'm just addressing it now. I was going to do this joint. I was thinking about doing the joint at this window just to like emphasize again, and then to be in that environment, to be in that energy when articulating this. Again, somewhat to prove a point, quote unquote. However, it's unnecessary, and it's like we got other things to worry about. Already it's dark. I'm doing this for 2 hours already, and it's not just the time. Being on the streets, there is like propensity for static. We do get harassments of visits. I'm reminded that just in the past day, in this past 24 hours, get some jitters in listening to the engine revs, and like, that's interesting. And being on the streets helps to nullify those jitteries. So that was part of the consideration as well. However, again, it's not priority. And so I just share what's got to be said, because that's what the if anything, that's what the emphasis is at the moment, is just to share the information and the insight. Being at the spot and being in the energy of the imagery, and additionally, is relevant, and it is beneficial. Because it also reveals things. When we see who passes by when I'm talking, that reveals things. Where the thought pattern goes, speaking extemporaneously, that reveals things, and that heals things, that addresses things further than just predetermined things from me sitting here in the sanctuary, with all the eyes on it, and additionally. So it is a difference. However, at the moment, it's not a priority to be there at the moment, so I'm not doing it at the moment, particularly because of the time thing. When we finished a stopping point in our project today, it was just like, yeah, it's not a lot of time to do that, particularly given what I've already shared today. So I can share the thought, the message, without being at the spot, to fulfill whatever semblance of priority there is perceived in this. So here we go. And maybe the situation on the street, oida. Maybe the situation on the street might be for another occasion, where there's daylight, where there's nighttime, or whatever else. At the moment, we're just doing this here. And again, this is Wednesday. It is the concluding day of our work week, and our official days for being online are Monday. So we're not planning to upload this for any time soon anyways. All right, so here's what we got to say about this joint. So again, the first joint that I did is about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, a number of weeks ago. I stand in front of the storefront, and again, there's nothing happening in the storefront. It's just debris, and sometimes there are workers that look like they're like doing some renovation or whatever, but it's pretty much been the same thing for the past month and a half, and it's been that way. It's been like in half mode or whatever for like maybe a year or further, and the billboards on the window fronts have been there for about at least 6 months, something like that, maybe even further, longer. And every time going to the library, see the sister, a young, attractive sister, wearing bikini type bottoms, and then like having some over jacket or whatever, but like her vagina is right there. her pubic hair, the crevice is right there and it's blown up. It's on the storefront. Walking by it, what's over there? Oh, okay. Continue on, day after day, just to go to the library, just to go to the bank or whatever. I don't go to the bank. They ain't got a bank account. But just the basic situation. Whenever people are just going there to go to the parking lot, to go to the store, boom, there it is. Ain't nothing happening in the store, but that's imagery, and it has an effect. Yo, man and woman is basic nature, primal, primordial, and that's part of the purpose. Manipulation, getting into brethren's head, getting into sister's head, and manipulating. And the one of the suggested escapes from that angst that's established through that advertisement is go buy something, from the store or otherwise. So just be in the community, because that's what it is. It's a sexually depraved and degenerate environment here. It's known for that. That's what people come here for. That's one of the reasons I came here without even knowing it. I came here because of the multiculturalism, the proximity with the university, a lot of international students, and being in a place where people from different backgrounds talk with each other, coffee shop or otherwise. But then in being here, recognizing, whoa, okay, see what's happening. Like, it's not as multiculturalism as it seems. It's a very Eurocentric, kind of imperialistic kind of norm that accepts pockets here and there, and those pockets tend to not interact with each other. And where the pockets do interact with each other, that tends to be a very heightened. First of all, it's sanctioned and it's facilitated by a Eurocentric imperialist management, and that management, when allowing that direct interaction between people of different cultures, also infuses directly sexual corruption, whether it's sodomy or whether it's pedophilia or both. So it's infused within that immediate environment, and that people go there for that reason. Young people go there particularly for the multiculturalism, and additionally, generally speaking, but then the young people, or the young people I'm talking about, the children with their families, with their parents, go there for the hookups, the arrangements, pedophilia, and sodomy. And it's very latent, it's very subtle, it's very nuanced, so it's very difficult to call out. But when one lives here long enough and sees the evidence of it, and then does call it out very gently, and then gets the response of it back, like doubling up and hostility back, it's like, whoa, oh, it's serious, okay. And that's what it is. So that's what we become aware of after living here. And then the way we are, like, it's not the most mobile things. We have to make arrangements, and additionally, so we actually do move. We've moved into the University Circle area near the masjid. Talk with the brethren from the masjid, and that's when we get scooped up. Not from the masjid, we didn't get scooped up, but that's when the city folk, and actually the university, the Imperial University, and additional folk take issue with us being there, and then we get locked up for that. That's one scenario. Then when we leave the country and get forcibly dragged back here, literally. So anyways, we are aware of the sexual, and not just the sexual, but just the degeneration, and particularly through the sexual exploitation that exists here in this village. And so that billboard is just one of the a part of it, because they're not the main joints. The main joints are actually ones that don't have billboards, where the actual hookups and arrangements are being made. So this one is just a storefront that just helps contribute to the culture of exploitation. Youth arrive here, disenfranchised youth, disaffected youth, and additionally flock here for some type of refuge from the oppressions about. And because of that, it's easier pickings for the predators, in providing them employment or otherwise, and then in providing that employment, eventually, if not immediately, soliciting other types of favors and job prospects accordingly. That's part of how the game works here. So the billboard front is just part of normalizing that, and desensitizing particularly children and others, to just be it's grooming the neighborhood, it's grooming the residents, it's grooming the visitors into this culture of sexual exploitation. So that's much of what it is. And so the sister in there showing her bikini, her pubic area, getting attention of men. She's an attractive woman. That's what it is. So that's what I speak to a few weeks ago, after months and months and months, passing that time hundreds of times. passing that point hundreds of times. And I cannot look at it, but that at that point, like now, it's still conditioning. It's still subordination. You better, if you don't want like it, don't look. How about, can I just like walk to a place without it existing, without like the tyranny of liberty? How about that? So, anyways, I speak to that a few weeks ago, and I speak disrespectfully. It's somewhat. It's not. It could be sarcasm. It's actuality, like honesty. When seeing a sister like that, there's a man like myself, a man including myself, wants to have sex with her. That's natural. That's the natural interaction between a man and a woman. It's purposeful. It's actually supposed to be that way. So, but we're not supposed to talk about it so much. We're supposed to respect, and additionally, that's genuine. And I spoke in a way that was disrespectful. I talk about wanting to have sex with her, and additionally, but I do that because it's being imposed upon me. So, all that being said, that's what I do. That was the videos there, whatever date, a few months ago, whatever else, that's there. I do it during a time of the day when it's less busy in terms of traffic. There's still people who walk by amidst me doing it, and the thing is, I try not to show the people because I'm not trying to put people on blast. But the people who walk by have an awareness of what I'm doing, have an awareness of who I am, and I actually have an intentionality of being there one way or the other. And I'm not trying to blow up people's spots, but just to recognize like things don't just happen by accident, and particularly where one lives, and particularly when people are vocal about these things, like passersby, when the ambulance just passed by, it's not just by happenstance. When the police pass by, it's not just by happenstance. When the fire truck passes by, it's not just by happenstance. So, and it's not necessarily an endorsement for everything I say or anything I say per se. However, at the same time, I mean, there's agreements and disagreements. Anyways, we're getting to a point why I'm doing this today. Why I would have been out there earlier today. Amidst other conditions, to do a follow-up, and the follow-up is to be further respectful, and if what's done is done, and I'm not making an apology for what is already done. We can reason about that. I have yet to be called out directly on it, because that's not how society is at this point. Even those who claim to be righteous otherwise are too tied up with imperialism to even acknowledge me, because in acknowledging me, it's one of the reasons why he's not even important enough. We don't have to don't give him any merit or anything else like that. But the other thing is that in acknowledging me, even just acknowledging me, in accusing me and condemning me, it's being called out, and it's extreme truth, and people who even address extreme truth get enveloped in the realm of extreme truth, and everything that they're doing gets exposed to a matching commensurate degree, and at any point they want to go further in condemning me for what I do, they get further scrutiny for what they do, not just from myself, but from the universe and from society. So most kinfolk aren't willing to go into these depths of honesty, and I'm not greater than anybody else, but that's just facts. Most people are very attached to the imperialism and cannot afford calling it out as much as I do at this moment. I'm not greater than anybody. I am not greater than anybody. I said it many times. I am a piece of shit, and I walk with God. Everyone is a child of God. I'm not better than anybody else. My role at this point in life, at this moment, in this era, is doing this, and it's not by choice. So, it's a deep dive in truth, and there's much of ancient wisdom that I have yet to remember, that other people have much further recollection and skills in sharing. But in terms of deep diving in truth, it gets pressurized and gets shaky below the submarines, and most kinfolk don't even want to get near it. So they send people to do things, but they don't do it themselves because they cannot afford to. And that's not a challenge. That's not like calling people out. It's not ego fronting. It's just facts. So, and we don't conquer anybody. We have nothing to win from nobody on this earth. Nobody has anything that we want. Everything comes from the Most High. And people can accuse me of lying and fronting, whatever else. How? What's the logic of lying about that? All right, so continuing on to this joint. I was disrespectful to her, but I can't apologize because she's being disrespectful too. But before I get into that, What I didn't show is what should be done, how a woman should be treated. So if I'm going to be all righteous or whatever about what trouble is, about being challenged by what's being experienced, what's beneficial for the future generations is to talk about how a woman should be treated, and what should be the scenario. So the basic joint is this. What I didn't say, if I have this in amidst this interest of having sex with her, which is facts, what is appropriate for me to share and articulate is not just that, but okay, if there's an interest of having sex, then first things first, who is her father? What is her father's name? What is her name? What is her mother's name? What is her family's name? What is her father's? What is her family's clan? Where does she come from? What is her language of her that she speaks? What is the language of her ancestors? What is her religiosity? What is her deen? What is her practice? What is her discipline? What are her interests? What does she like to do in life? What's her story? Those are fundamentals. Those are essentials. That's necessary. Respect. Know who she is. Because when a man is talking about having sex with a woman, and he has any semblance of righteousness, what he's talking about is creating life with that woman, having a child. And if he has any semblance of responsibility in that prospect, in that actuality of having a child with that woman is becoming the mother of his child and teaching that child the path of life for generations. Potentially unending. So that's a little bit too much in terms of like concept, but just to understand that's the mother of his children that he's talking about. If he's talking about having sex with a woman, he's talking about having a child with that woman, and the woman being the child's mother. And if the father, the far, needs to know something about that more, about who she is and what she's about, and what she's going to be teaching his son, what she's going to be teaching his daughter, because that son and daughter is his anchor in life, are his sovereigns in life, immediate bosses, and immediate bosses feeding from her breast. So he better know something about her for his own benefit. Who is her father? What's his father's name? What's her name? What's her mother's name? What's the name of her family? What is her family's clan? What land does she come from? What tradition does she come from? What language does she come from? What languages does she come from? What lands does she come from? What peoples does she come from? What is she about? What is her deen? What is her discipline? What is her ethic? What is her daily routine and her daily discipline? How does she care? Is she okay? Does she have a place to stay? Does she have clothes? Does she have food to eat? Does she have supplies? Is she taken care of? Does she have discipline? Does she have modesty? Does she know the necessities of life? Does she know how to clean a room? Does she know how to clean a diaper? Does she know how to prepare food? Does she know how to cook? Does she know how to clothe or mend clothing? Does she know how to wash clothing? All these basics are necessities that he needs to know before having sex, or even before expressing having sex. That's on me. So that is some of the consideration in that situation of procreation. There's further. That's just basic respect of a man towards a woman when having that type of interest. Now, that being said, first, I mentioned before that there's some onus on her too. It's a two-way street. I am responsible for what I do, and not blaming anyone, but at the same time, acknowledging like harms that are being done and the harm that she causes in this scenario. All this is done from just a photograph. It's too much, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And that's the susceptibility when people live in an intense way. Like religious people have it's live with like a stethoscope. How about that? A science reference for here. But just like for certain things that people hear, it might just like go in and out, like not pay a lot of attention, and because there's a numbness, a numbness, um, that dulls the vibration and dulls the sensation. When people live in a disciplined way, in a spiritual way, there are many who live in a way that's further disciplined than myself in many ways, in different ways. But when people live in that disciplined way, the same sounds, the same vibration has a much greater volume because there's less of that numbness. It has much a greater effect within the interior because there's less of that facade. There's further proximity and receptivity of honesty instead of just like shielding out, white noising all the BS around oneself. There's less of that. And so all the same sounds, the same decibels are increasingly voluminous within the interior and have an increasing effect within the mind. And additionally, which is why there's a further strictness in behavior and what one gets involved with, not going out to the club, even just to like sit and watch things, because that has a further effect on oneself. Not interacting or talking with women because it has a further effect. Women are extremely powerful. Why are you tripping? Women are extremely powerful. The sexuality of women is extremely powerful. Women rape men through the mind. That's known for thousands of years. It's known as a weapon of warfare. Women's sexuality. Extremely powerful. And religious men, strict men, disciplined men, monks, and otherwise are keenly aware of this, which is why there's a distance. There's rules and laws and protocols of keeping a distance, not even touching. Because that electricity, be careful of listening, getting into the ear, the visual. Once there, it's in the membranes, and it's very tedious to simply, like, once it's there, it's planted. So, and when a man is single, it festers. There's little healthy way to go. So, and because of that, a woman is responsible for how she presents herself, for how she allows herself to be presented. Maybe like a postmodern technology way of describing the effect that a woman has when on a poster like that would be like an AI generated audio cat caller. Like whenever whenever a woman walks by, like the audio AI device or whatever just automatically starts catcalling that woman. Ooh, baby. Keep saying baby. Ooh, shorty, you fine with all that da 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 da. Now, it's not loud. It's not causing her physical harm, but it's getting into her mind. It's disrespectful. It has a negative influence. But at the same time, the liberal argument is it's freedom of speech. It's not hurting anybody. It's just a display. Everybody has the freedom, da 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 da. We paid for this. It's our rent, da 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 da. That's a similar comparison to the billboard there. There's no comparison though, because the way a woman gets into a man's mind, I mean, it's the actual comparison is a man touching and grabbing and molesting a woman's body. And not saying it's the same kind of severity or otherwise, but it's along those lines. That's how severe it is, how much of an effect a woman has in a man's mind. And a woman cannot tell. A woman cannot say and judge about that because a woman does not know. Even if a woman knows everything about a man does not know everything about a woman. And because of that, a woman cannot know everything about a man. How about that? That's simple logic. Simple logic. Elementary school logic. So because of that, a woman can't say what effect she has on a man or doesn't. So she's just gonna have to take our word for it. A man can say what he feels when his body is violated, as nasty as that is. and still not know like how much it is to a woman necessarily to cause pregnancy, a life to establish within a woman's womb forcefully. It's one of the greatest atrocities that we can imagine, beyond torture, to be honest. So, anyway, there's responsibility on the part of the woman in that respect too. And first thing in looking at that part of the component, aside from the onus of myself, looking on her side and the side of the people around her putting it on. First, recognizing, just as a side note, after I did that recording, like the next day or the day after or whatever, the billboard was somewhat askew. And again, it's all in the interior, so it was done from the inside. There's nothing going on, and it's been half in the mode of half renovation. But there were people observed at some point amidst the recording of that joint, and then like a day or two later, after I recorded it, the image itself was kind of like folded in, so it wasn't as visible. It wasn't taken down, but it wasn't as visible, and there seemed like no need to touch the billboard unless it was intentional, because there's nothing going on there, generally speaking. So it's like, interesting. That seems like some feigned quasi-compromise, but it was still there. It was still lightweight visible, but it was just folded back a little bit, and it was like that for a few weeks, and then eventually, like, it got put further back onto the window like it was before. So perhaps there was like a reversion, or like, yeah, now the truce is over, the ceasefire is over, and now it's back on front. So that's where it stands at this point. It's been flattened out against the window again. So anyways, that's a side note. So going back to addressing the sister and her responsibility, her involvement in this situation. It's not just all on me. I blame myself, and I can't put blame on anybody else, but I can acknowledge the behavior and the conditions that are hurtful, just for the information, so people who are observing can know for themselves, and for the youngsters and otherwise to learn. So on her part, first matter is this: is she a woman? Like, can we recognize her being a woman, that she's of a certain age where she's growing pubic hair that's visible from being shaved by what she's showing and presenting of herself, presumably volitionally, like she's voluntarily modeling and having her photography and likeness being displayed in such a way and being compensated for that. So first, is she a woman, or is it a child? That's the first distinction, or a first distinction. So she seems to be a woman. Her breasts are, as I mentioned before, comparatively large. That shows certain maturation, being able to nurse a baby, and pubic hair indicating menstrual flowing. It's not the equivalent, but it is an indication of being of that age. So that indicates that she is of the age of having sex, having a child, procreating. However, whatever her actual age of years is, that's another question. If she's underage or if she's overage, that seems to be further on society and on the government and on her modeling agency and parents and whoever else, rather than the people who are walking by. So based on the physicality, she seems to be a woman, that she's able to procreate, she's able to have a child. So there's that. Now, with that presumption being accurate of her being a woman, then the consideration is as a woman, how much responsibility does she have for her actions? For example, as a woman, is she empowered? Does she have the, in a societal sense, does she have the prerogative of doing certain things or whatever else? Is the display of herself part of her prerogative of empowerment and expression and otherwise? Is she a queen? Is she a shot caller? Is all the pretenses of any model agency or storefront retailer or whatever else just the mechanisms of her displaying her prominence as a queen? This is her domain, and part of the nature of her authority is her sexuality and influence over a man, particularly to get to do what she wants to do. How much of that is involved in the situation too? That sounds rather contrived and whatever, but it may be further difficult for people to acknowledge the legitimacy of that thing. Not saying that's the absolute scenario, but there's an element of that in any woman doing that. It being her expressing her sexuality with with a certain intentionality and awareness of domination, influence, manipulation, and behavioral control of the men that she influences from her sexuality. Now, she might not necessarily be in total control of herself at that moment, maybe already being molested, maybe already being in some quasi experience of being trafficked or whatever. And so there's all different types of leverage and game being run. However, the end result or the bottom line at the moment at the storefront is her displaying herself, her displaying her sexuality for the intention of manipulating, of influencing, let's say it like that, influencing the behavior, particularly of men, maybe young men, boys, children, women, and otherwise, explicitly, presumably for the purpose of selling whatever the materials and the retailer is offering, but also to further contribute to the culture of sexual degeneracy within the environment, which is why it's allowed to stay up there like that, because the vicinity of other storefronts and businesses and everything else like that value that sexual degenerative culture. So that's why it's accepted and staying there for as long as it is, particularly without there ever even being anything inside the store. Still, it's debris and in the state of quasi renovation for half a year at least to this day. So then it's again questioning what's the intentionality with these advertisements or these posters or whatever propaganda, and what is her role in those explicit intentionalities and predominant intentionalities. And then with her role, there's her responsibility, because it's all elements of imperialism. It's all elements of predatoriness and manipulation. Anytime it's sexual exploitation, plain and simple, where how much she's volunteering and a volitional participant in it or a volitional leader in it, that's somewhat to be determined, discussable, or otherwise. However, it is plain and simple sexual exploitation. So the people who are putting it there are doing it for the point of subordinating others, particularly men, but women and children as well. And to the degree that she is volitionally participating in that, then she is volitionally responsible as well. Not just that, but that the nature of her intrinsic queendom, which every woman has, that's her nature, or that's her doctrine that she's putting down as her queen in this realm of her domain, amidst all the competing claims of realms and domains in this vicinity. So in that respect, the question becomes again, what is her deen? What is her religion? What is her doctrine? What are her laws? Anyways, again, it gets further, but because at that point, then it becomes a challenge to anybody else's laws who are different than that, who encounter that sign in the propaganda. And that's somewhat where I speak from, because we live in a different way, but at the same time, we have susceptibilities and vulnerabilities to those types of tactics. So we have to respond to it in the ways that we have available to work towards resolution, reconciliation, health, and well-being. So this leads to the question: is this all right? Oh, one way of looking at it as well is like the effect that the woman has on a man is like this. If we give kinfolk a gallon of water, if somebody not even forces somebody to drink a gallon of water, because drinking water, most people I think would also think of that being somebody still had to have willfully drink it, but somehow somebody forcefully ingested water. I don't know if if an IV line actually leads to the necessity of somebody urinating that liquid, how much that translates to that kind of experience where that liquid hydration goes. However, just an idea of somebody being forced to drink a gallon of water and then told that they cannot urinate. Forced to drink a gallon of water and cannot urinate. How does that work? That seems implausible. Like at some point, I speak from experience. Whether I want to or not, the urination happens. I can hold it and 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 hold it as much as I can for hours, even for days. At some point, in my experience, the urination happens. One way to like stop urination is to stop drinking anything. Dehydration, that has its own detriments. But other than that, generally speaking, when somebody drinks something, there's the necessity eventually of urinating. So to force hydrate, to force water into somebody's system to the point where they have to urinate, but then not allowing them to urinate. That's what happens when women display women's sexuality. And then for men who are not married, who are searching for marriage and additionally to be a householder. Men produce semen, and it is beyond man's control, much like a woman's menstrual cycle. But unlike a woman's menstrual cycle, the release or the expulsion of that life force, well, we haven't finished with the metaphor here yet. So pause on that for a second. The metaphor goes further. So drinking a thing of water, a gallon of water, not being able to urinate, but then also not only is it this particular type of being, because when that person does urinate, it is the man who urinates or pisses out the golden urine. That's all different types of convoluted crassness, but that's like where this metaphor goes, because just say it again. When the man, particularly in the scenario of being a man, I'm not trying to give, I don't know if they want free advertisement. When a man drinks the water and urinates in this scenario that I'm describing, that urine is gold. It's like valued. It's extremely valuable, coveted gold. So the man being forced to drink a gallon of water, then told not to urinate but has to urinate, and then when urinating, the urine is gold. So that is the metaphor for a man and his experience of sexual stimulation, the generation of semen, and the ejaculation of semen. A man produces semen and has a natural interest and natural guidance and direction and yearning for sexual interaction and planting the seed within a woman, or within a healthy relationship in a woman's womb, like the earth. That's part of the purpose of his agitation, is to guide him into that experience of relationship with a woman. It's a sacred, miraculous experience. Let me tell it. And when that actual relation, the sexual interaction between a man and woman, between a husband and wife, is obstructed or unavailable for a man, that angst accumulates, builds and builds and builds, like the necessity of urinating. It's a bodily, it's a mental, spiritual, and heart experience, but it's also a bodily experience too. And it builds and it becomes further angst, like an elephant in must. It just becomes further stress and further distraction. And the essence of his seed is life force. So when the seed is expelled, his life force is expelling. It's not just gold, it's himself, it's his life, it's his relations, it's the things that nurture him from the beginning of his conception to that day. That's being expelled from him when he ejaculates. Much like the same experience and angst and pain that a woman experiences in her menstrual cycle. When her life force is being expelled, when her seed is expelled, it's her life and it's her relations and it's her nurturing from her conception to that day. But it's a monthly, non-voluntary thing, generally speaking, in a natural experience. And a woman is just resigned to that cycle and to that rhythm, and there's purposefulness within that. For a man, it's not the rhythm, it's not the same thing. He's further in his own world. He doesn't have that regular attachment, involuntary attachment that a woman does, and the expulsion of his seed is very much influenced by his own mind and his own doings, his own communication and relationship with life and circumstances, rather than the cycle of the moon. So it's a further wrestling with his own ego and a resignation of his own ego, rather than a woman being acclimated to the natural rhythms of earth and sun and moon and universe. So for a man, it's a mental and spiritual and heart and physical wrestling. And when a woman introduces the powers of her sexuality, that inflates, it's further water in his system. That makes it further difficult. And it's not blaming a woman. It's a beautiful thing. It's not blaming her, but just understanding the actuality. Because when he does experience that, then he's further susceptible to manipulation, to being like he becomes further desperate. So that a woman, if he's being increasingly stimulated and doesn't have a place or a means to relieve that stimulation, then when another woman arrives and just gives a suggestion, and he knows, like, wait, that's not the healthiest thing. Like, she's not ready. She's not doesn't have the practice or the skill set or whatever else to be the mother of his children and to live in the same discipline that he does. That she's involved in all different types of corruptions with all different types of men and whatever else. That's not healthy. But at the same time, when he's stimulated, it's not an excuse. He's responsible, but he's also further vulnerable. And people know that, so that when a man is known for being backed up or whatever, that's target for predatoriness. The pimps coming around and showing the women and the women misguiding and leading and gaslighting and everything else the man away from what his job is, what his occupation and vocation is in life. And that's what billboards like that do, and that's the purpose of it. So it's just a matter of being honest about that and understanding, being honest about what the adverse effects are. And what some people might say again, poor baby, man, be a man, just grow up, shut the fuck up, and be a man. The weak ass motherfucker can't control himself. Okay. So that's for me, that's fine. But at the same time, I'm not the only one who's affected by it, and I have a responsibility about that as well. So there's little expectation of there being significant interest, advocacy, or empathy for myself specifically. I've let go of living for myself a long time ago, and everything that I do is for a greater purpose than myself. I still have legitimacy. It's still legitimate to care for myself, for others to care about me, but to know that everything that I do is not just for myself, and part of what I'm doing here is not just for myself. So, and there's legitimacy and support for that as well. Whether people want to recognize that or not, that's on people's themselves. So anyways, continuing on, here's where we're going with this. It's a question. Recognizing the conditions and the effects that I just communicated. It seems like it was comparatively clear, somewhat concise and relevant. So it seems also to be like kind of basically logical, makes sense. It seems difficult to like argue against that too tough. So here's where we go with this, the advanced consideration and discussion. It's this: ain't seen the fine squirrels yet. They may be like, no, he's still doing this thing. But here's where we're going with this. In that scenario of the billboard being put up there, the poster being put up there, it's not a billboard, it's a poster, the poster being put up there, and the woman being empowered, and having a quasi volitional involvement in her image being taken and utilized, her sexuality, her pubic hair and vagina area being displayed on Front Street, literally on the storefront and on the public streets. In that scenario, amidst a culture of other posters similarly being displayed of other storefronts, and sexual exploitation being committed on a regular basis in that culture, here's a question. Like I said, her politics, is that a question? Yes. Her politics are different than mine. How she displays herself, again, I mentioned in the first video, coming from a Rastafari background, and additionally, there's a championing of natural, no makeup, natural hair on African women, particularly natural hair. So with the sister up there, her hair is processed and a lot of makeup on. So we live different politics. We live different religiosity in general. There might be compatibility, but at the moment, at the surface level, at the face value, is different. So even though there's an interest of having sex, there's a recognition of comparative, at the moment, incompatibility. So that's just it. And aside from just the immodest display, which is also a difference in our religiosity and politics, it seems like she's also sporting a leather jacket, whatever. We're vegan. So again, there's another differentiation, a significant differentiation, because that goes into what we teach our children too. Our mothers have to be vegan and promote healthy relationship with all our relations. So she just in that display, in that poster, shows a different politics and religiosity than myself personally. So even though there's an interest of me having sex with her, one could even lightweight say her's having sex with me. We're going to talk about the rationality of that as well, of her displaying herself as an open candidate for marriage, and additionally, and to whoever receives that image, to respond to her classified ad for marriage and sexual interaction. So that's legitimate. It might be somewhat exaggerated otherwise, but that's part of the cost that she experiences in putting herself out there like that, because she's making that advertisement to everybody, every man, woman, and child who sees that, and that is significant for her. But anyways, that's another topic. But recognizing that there being a differentiation of politics between herself and myself, just as she's presented in that imagery, with the processed hair, the makeup, the leather, and the immodest dress. Attractive woman, shapely, nice body, and everything. But that's pretty much what I know about her, and that's it. So because of that, it's like, okay, like it's an interesting. It's an attractive offer, and additionally in terms of prospect of marriage or whatever. But at the same time, I recognize that we have different. Our priorities are different. Our religious and political and behavioral discipline is different. So I have to look at other women as marital prospects. So this is the question we're getting to. Amidst the conditions as they stand at this moment, and that's also part of the purpose for doing this at the window, to show that it's still there after all this time, and we still have to deal with it on a regular basis. So amidst these conditions, here's the question to the general public, and I already told you again, another side note, the citizens being responsible for this, because it's being done by the citizens sanctioning, and whatever taxes and additionally that are being reaped from it. The certificates and license and for the construction are symbols of that buy-in of and that sanctioning of approval from the municipality, the city, and thus the citizens. So anyways, the question is this. Presuming that all these conditions are acceptable to society, for a woman to display herself on a storefront, blown up picture of the area of her vagina, showing her pubic hairs and the crevice between her thigh and her pelvis, blown up, life-size, thereabouts photo of her vagina right in the face. the presumption of that being acceptable by society, by the city, by the state, by the national government, by the citizens. If that's the situation, and there's a recognition that, okay, she is who she is, and there's just a difference of thing. Does that mean that it's it is approved of from society for me to find another option, another woman who similarly displays herself, her vagina, her pubic hair, and additionally, or maybe it's a little bit getting caught up in the facetiousness, but who displays herself, we'll go with this, who displays herself in a similar way, but with further proximate politics with my own, meaning that instead of having processed hair, she has natural hair. Instead of wearing all that makeup, she has less makeup. I mentioned the principle of her being modest, and that's legitimate and ongoing, but in the scenario of being turned on already by her image, then just substituting that image for another image. And that's hypocrisy on my side. But for the purpose of the question right here, on the part of society, is that acceptable for me to go and find another image that is further approximate with the religiosity and politics that we practice on our side? Is that permissible? Is that acceptable? If not, favorable and optimal. Is it acceptable within society? That's one thing. The second thing is it acceptable if I go even further, and instead of just acquiring the imagery of a woman who has further proximate, who displays further proximate politics, such as myself, with natural hair and without makeup, and otherwise, is it acceptable if instead of just a display of a woman in a bikini showing the area around her vagina and her shaved pubic hair, that I acquire imagery of a woman who is fully naked and shows her the actuality of her vagina and her full-grown pubic hair? And additionally, is that acceptable? One answer at the very moment is it is legal. Pornography. It's legal. Is it acceptable? Where is the line drawn in terms of public display if pornography is supposed to be a private thing? Which we don't agree with pornography. And I've viewed pornography just this past week, in the past day. And it's painful. And it's degenerative. And it's not voluntary, because there's a point for why I'm saying this, and why I do that, and why we're continuing to search for reconciliation, and why the question is posed. There's a process, though, to get to that. Just to recognize what the conditions are at this moment. What the sister displays of herself on the storefront window. What category we would describe that as, if not pornographic itself, because she's not actually displaying her actual clitoris and the opening of her vagina. She's not actually displaying her areola and the nipple of her breast, but the shape of it. In addition, that's when we get to the nuanced pimp talk that claims some type of differentiation between pornography, sexual exploitation, and modeling sexual exploitation. Oh, we didn't show this. Oh, we airbrushed the nipple out so it's not visible. We've airbrushed the actual lines of the clitoris so it's not camel toe. So technically it's not pornography. It's acceptable standards. Where is that statute? How is that contrived? Who are the lawmakers who decide what's permissible and not permissible? Particularly when at the same time pornography is still legal. I guess it's the age at that point. So what constitutes pornography and what constitutes non-pornography? And then we get into the whole film rating situation, because that applies to sexual intercourse. If people are naked, well, the whole issue again is bullshit. And the Supreme Court is still, to my knowledge, to this day, the Supreme Court doesn't know how to distinguish between concerning pornography and other forms of expression, even nudity. Um, but the point is, if this is being displayed in public involuntarily to women, children, and men, um, the question isn't necessarily where the line is drawn between that and pornography. The further question is this: where are we getting to? I'll endeavor to articulate. Like I said, it takes a lot of effort to just concentrate to articulate this. All right, I think I'm going to endeavor to like jump to the basic question, like the basic, um, the crux of the situation, and I'm trying to think of how to articulate, and then also trying to think of how to explain that if necessary. So it's basically all right. It's basically like this: if we recognize there's a distinction, there's a differentiation, genuinely, if even then, even though the lines may be blurry, we recognize generally, even within the experience of pornography, there are different types of pornography. From soft core porn, independent, whatever kind of porn, to like pimp, abusive, forcing a woman to do webcam type stuff, type porn, to like full full intercourse, prostitution type porn, to like um, the nasty um, what's it called? Really, the nasty like rape porn and stuff, like the actual rape porn, or even like staged rape porn or whatever. But just that realm, and just like atrocities and nastiness. There are the degrees of porn, and this is not excusing any of it. It's all exploitation. It's all painful. It's Brother Sneaker calls it all the devil, OnlyFans, and everything else. It's all spiritually evaporating. It's enslavement to the spirit, to the demons, and additionally, and not just blindly conjuring up that terminology, but it's enslavement to the demons that the woman is experiencing before that. So that's part of the nature of the attachment between a man and a woman. Now, that being said, recognizing the categorizations, distinctions, that some being much further harmful and severe than others, uh, then the realm of modeling, where it's not as actually always nudity or otherwise, but it's a swimsuit, it's a bikini, it's lingerie, everything's not being shown. And so that's the feigned like public acceptability of it being displayed in Target department store in front of children in the checkout aisle, or on storefronts on the streets, when people aren't even going to that store but still have to be exposed to it and answer to the children, oh mommy, what's that woman doing, what is she wearing? So there's a recognition of a distinction, because presumably society would not allow somebody like a full out display of a woman naked, showing her vagina and clitoris, although that's actually what happened at the coffee house. It wasn't a photograph, it was a drawing that a man showed of a woman with her legs spread open showing her clitoris, where children go to. And additionally, and when I questioned the coffee shop about it, it was a doubling down of oh, this is, the artist is actually a proprietor of the coffee shop, and then he did this a number of years ago. It's of his wife. It's reclaiming the beauty of natural childbirth, and this and the other. It's pimp talk. It's a woman naked with her legs spread open showing her clitoris, and above that there's another drawing of just a woman's breast and her nipple, right there in public display. Now, it was in the interior of the coffee shop. It wasn't on the front street, but it's right there where all the customers see. And it's a display of all the artwork and everything else like that. And the children look towards that. It's not as obvious and everything else as the woman, the sister on the storefront today, but it's the same thing in terms of public display. No, very little filters in terms of age. Children from the streets without their parents go there asking for free water or whatever else, because that's the nature of the trafficking going on at that place, at that establishment. Facts. Motherfucking facts. So, I was about to say, presumably, like, society would not accept a store just putting a photograph of a naked woman showing her clitoris, but then I had to pause and say, well, actually, it's already being done. So, but I'm just still gonna say that scenario. Like, it's a woman right now who's showing her area of her vagina, showing the crevice between her thigh and her clitoris. That's visible. Showing the public her pubic hairs that are shaved. That's visible, and blown up almost to life size right on Front Street. Anybody walking. So if that's acceptable by society, by the city of Cleveland Heights, by the Coventry Village here, and additionally, if that's acceptable, all right, okay. Again, the question is not comparing acceptable. The question is further something else. In that scenario, where society accepts it, because that's what society is doing at this moment. It's there right now. It's been there for months. There's no use going to the police or the city or anybody else about it. Nobody cares about that. Anybody not gonna do anything about that. Come on. And it wouldn't do that anyways, because we do things that way. Like I said, if anything, it was a matter of like throwing a rock through the window or something else. Anyways, we're not on that at this moment either, because that's not a priority. But it's acceptable by society at this moment. So if that's acceptable society by this moment, we're getting down into the storage thing now. We're over 2 hours into this exactly. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm gonna venture into articulating, explaining what I'm positing at this point, without having it all completed for presentation. So it's a matter of recalling what is previously organized, because to be honest, what's happening at the moment is, as I'm working on my project of involving the scriptures, Torah, Bhagavad Gita, Digha Nikaya, Dhammapada, Gospels, Quran, and Tao Te Ching, and I'm listening to music as well as a way of particularly keeping away other types of signals around myself. As I'm involved in that, then I get insights about these conditions about life and going on, and so then the thoughts arrive, the guidance and the insight arrives, because I'm working with the energy and the guidance of these teachings, ancient teachings and truth. So then I get the solutions, but then I can't stop to make notes or to do this or whatever, because I'm working on something at the moment. So work on it, get to a point of stopping, and then like regroup, fix some food, and then endeavor to articulate it again. And the level of concentration is now lower. There's increasingly susceptibility with the earthly and distraction, and additionally, so that's probably what I'm dealing with at the moment. So I'm going to endeavor, God willing, to articulate the gist, or start the gist, without having it all, without having like the summary conclusion available at the moment. But it's along the lines of this. When an environment, when conditions, when an experience of sexual exploitation is imposed upon a person and imposed upon a people, there are effects. There are negative effects. There are adverse effects. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. All right. All right. This is somewhat further of what it is. All right. So, um, felt like the Sinead O'Connor moment right there. Concentration. All right. All right. Here's the thing. When those displays are made, there are negative effects. It affects people in a negative way. And one of those negative effects much of those negative effects is discouraging and influencing people to initiate and participate within negative interactions with others. For example, when a man sees a woman, an attractive young woman, large breasts, showing her vagina, and additionally, it puts thoughts into his head, and that negatively influences him to want to have sex with another woman. That's negative effect and negative interaction with another woman. So one way of minimizing that consequence of negativity, of him having uncommitted, irresponsible sexual interaction with another woman, and through whatever means, through mutuality, through manipulation, through purchasing, or otherwise, all of it without commitment of marriage, is hurtful. So as a way of mitigating the harm that he causes to another woman and to himself for getting involved with a woman and attached and expelling his life force futilely, rather than doing that, him going to pornography or concentration. And it's all types of Freudian here. It's all types of me talking about myself. But it's also talking beyond myself as well, because there is that word that means habitual, or okay. There's a comprehensive macro experience within this. Okay. So the displays like that storefront, and additionally, envelop a man within an experience of softcore pornography. That's what that is. It's softcore pornography. Immediately, right there, women who see it, children who see it, men who see it, are immersed within an experience of softcore pornography. The waving of rainbow flags and the whole sodomy propaganda is immersing people within an experience of soft core pornography. The normalization and the thought and the promotion of sodomy, and all types of degenerative sexual behavior. It's further potent than people flying a cannabis flag, because, like cannabis, people can get high off the contact without even smoking. However, unlike cannabis, when somebody just sees an image of a cannabis, that's not contact from the medicinal quality of the cannabis. However, when people see the rainbow flags, when people see the sodomy propaganda, that is literally getting intoxicated by the sexual degeneration, because the nature of the sexual degeneration is significantly mental. It's physical, but it's beyond physical as well. Just like watching and viewing an image of a woman who's half naked. There's no physical contact, it's visual, but it's still intoxicated, high off the effect, high off the contact, the suggestion, the mere suggestion. So when that's imposed upon people, that has an immediate effect on people, an immediate adverse effect. And when that is compounded and amplified by the culture of people who are drawn to that, women walking the streets being half naked, being very pronounced in the powers of women's sexuality, that has further effects, negative effects, that are involuntary. It's imposed. It's molestation of the mind, where women are very powerful over men. As men are powerful over women concerning the body. So that is molestation, and it's sexual predatoriness in a soft core pornography type of way. Involuntary, imposed. And the consideration here is what men do amidst those conditions, amidst being molested. From not just the billboards, not just from the posters of soft core pornography, or even soft core pornography, but from the behavior and the presence of people amidst the displays of soft core pornography. And the important thing is the susceptibility of causing further harms to others in terms of degenerative, direct sexual interaction that is not committed and that is not healthy, that is not procreating. So within, I guess this is where it's going, is like within an experience of imposed sexual exploitation, when one is immersed deeply in an environment, in an actuality of sexual exploitation, all different types of sexual exploitation, and continues to have a need and guidance, even spiritual guidance, for sexual interaction. And yet, in the meantime, that healthy option of sexual healthy sexual relationship through marriage is obstructed in the sexual exploitation environment, meaning that sexual exploitation in society is pervasive, and that exploitation renders it very difficult for people to have healthy relationship with each other, because that healthy relationship requires shelter and supplies and sustenance to support the man and woman together and support new life. Yet often to acquire and to secure those means, it requires cooperation with the surrounding environment. And when that surrounding environment is very much enveloped in sexual exploitation And even though the kinfolk in the man and woman in the family might not be involved in it, then the environment of sexual exploitation that has immediate stewardship and sequestering of the supplies and food and everything else like that, have the susceptibility of withholding those unless there is some type of sexual exploitation within the house of the husband and wife, the man and woman. So then it becomes a question of how much this is not where it's going. To be honest, I think the endeavor is to explain the susceptibility of viewing pornography as the minimal sexual exploitation of this moment amidst the conditions. That's the general gist. But it seems implausible because, like, the guidance is just don't do it. But that's not an option when it's being done to somebody. There is a mutuality within the experience. And so when it's already being done to somebody, and there's a necessity of somebody doing the actual act, and there also being a certain balance, the consideration is how to return it in a way that is minimally harmful for others. So, for example, this is another way of describing, let's just try to do it. So again, in this scenario of, I've said this before actually, recently, in the scenario of being stimulated by the women, and women are beautiful, and there's purposefulness within that stimulation, but there's also predatoriness within that, and women are extremely powerful, and when women know a man is backed up and everything else like that, he's further targeted, particularly if he's recognized as having riches to share, or even if he's recognized by others, the pedophiles and otherwise, as a threat, and thus a motivation just to reduce his life force, and additionally employ the women to seduce and get him to expend himself and his life force. So in those conditions, the question becomes, without the man being married, what is the most healthy way of him? What is the optimally healthy way of him responding to those advances amidst the conditions? And again, one might say, be disciplined and just hold back and celibacy. But that is not a plausible option. Why? Because first there's night emissions, and involuntary expulsion of the life force. And in that process, leading up to that, heightened sensitivity in terms of mindfulness, which is very beneficial actually, but at the same time, in that heightened sensitivity of mindfulness and honesty, the people with whom the man is able to talk with most readily and honestly are either one, women who are very inviting of sexual interaction on the spot, very attractive women, who feel his power and vibration, and that propensity of like sex at that moment, wherever Janet Jackson, at that moment, obviously is harmful for all people involved, even when it's mutually consensual and otherwise. So that's one of and dealing with that on a daily basis, that type of temptation, and it's a distraction, because he has to consider it. He has to think about, okay, well, what about marriage and this and the other? And then he thinks about how he can talk with that. The woman just wants sex at that moment, no strings attached, just wants sex, and he's actually thinking of a way of like how to share marriage and encourage her to have marriage. Is it distracting because that takes him from his core vocation and responsibilities? And I'm speaking from personal experience. That's me. That's one thing. The other thing also in that experience of heightened mindfulness is that a lot of the bullshit. Well, there's the women, very attractive women, who make advances subtly and explicitly, and it's very distracting. It's an amazing, beautiful experience, but it's very distracting, and it's actually very painful, because like it's falling in love on a daily basis, and it's extremely painful. It's a beautiful thing, but it's extremely painful. That's one thing, and that it's increased when being backed up, and when being disciplined, and when being honest, and on one's spiritual deen. So that's one thing. The other kinfolk who are who are become further pronounced and involved. There are the two categories that I can think of at the moment. I'm trying to think which one would be the better one to say first or next. Um, I'll say the other category is virgin women who tend to be very young, because virgin, a woman generally speaking who's in society. I have to wrap this up. Women who in society, and particularly independent women who are able who walk the streets, whether as a student, as a worker, or whatever else, tend not to be virgins. That's just the general. That's facts. Even if it's just one, even if she's with a boyfriend all her life, this at that moment, boyfriends and girlfriends are play toys, are playthings. So that's one thing. Marriage is marriage, but most women walking around alone or even in groups are not virgins, and because of that, the wavelength is different. And when a man, even a middle-aged man with gray hair, is on his deen and discipline, and backed up, the heightened mindfulness, telepathy, and vibrations, and additionally, even attractive women are less on that wavelength, because attractive women, by and large, are already immediately attached with other men, very often many men, and so the sexual power of such women, beyond just the aesthetic, is less potent, and it's less of a temptation for a man, because he just sees the trouble already immediately. She's attractive, banging body and looks, and all natural, and interesting, no makeup, young, 18, 17, whatever, banging. But at the same time, it's not as much of a temptation, because in his vibration, he can see, like, oh, she was with so and so the other day. He feels that. He can feel like her energy of the semen that's in her at that moment. It's like that. It's like that. And a man on his deen, backed up and additionally disciplined, can feel like the ovulation of another woman, and can feel her feeling him, and how much semen he has within him at that moment, at the ready, without saying anything. Modestly dressed, not showing any form of anything. It's just like man and woman talking without saying anything. That's part of the heightened experience on the deen, like discipline, celibacy. So all that being said, and that's why, again, very often it's not a temptation for a man. Like, it's falling in love immediately. Like, a woman just does a glance, it's like, what? It's thunderstruck. It's literally not even minute after minute, 20 seconds after 20 seconds, walking along a campus or otherwise, and seeing woman after woman. Particularly when I'm in my discipline of saying hi to everybody. So that's not the point here. The point is this: it's not a temptation, as much of a temptation, because there's already a knowledge about the troubles of falling to that temptation. So in that heightened experience, it is a temptation when a woman actually makes an advance and initiates conversation, and like offers herself directly as well as subtly, but makes that advance directly, so that a man has to respond. Particularly a man on a spiritual path is asked a question about something, have to respond, and in that there's vibration. Like, she's ready to have sexual interaction in that type of intimacy right now, and it's because of the pains that she experienced beforehand, and wants to experience that sensuality, and that, like, and then thus the connections and compulsions accordingly, without necessarily pre-committing to marriage, and that becomes the challenge, that becomes the temptation, and that's a further significant distraction. and that also precipitates night emissions and otherwise, because that's one of the reasons why men are directed not to have that type of interaction with women. However, it is what it is. Now, the second category is this, and the hesitancy and the procrastination can speak for itself. But the second category is, in that heightened experience, there's less temptation towards the women who are dimes or whatever else banging, because there's already a recognition of like the trouble. We can see the trouble of just falling to that temptation, so it's less of a thing. Um, However, that being said, when it's virgin women, again, the virgin women who are out on the in public, is generally at a very younger age, 14, 15 years old, and women menstruating, still forming. The bodies are still growing, breasts are still growing, muscle tissue is still growing, and additionally, so not fully developed physically, but at the same time already able to have children in the stage of what is considered traditionally as womanhood. And virgin, still living in the parents' household, might even be with the parents on the streets. And additionally, very often that's the case. Not very often are there recognizable virgins that just one could recognize as such. However, that's usually the case, and that's supported. Healthy, stay with parents. But what I'm saying is this: it's the communication, because it's vibes, it's vibration, it's the honesty, whereby when a woman is sexually active, her potency is gone. It's not gone. It's decreased, and so her displaying her sexuality is influential towards men whose game is also lessened. But for a man whose game is high, that display sexuality is less effective and potent, because her sexuality, the powers of her sexuality, are decreased. She's already her virility is already invested within whatever other men that she's sexually active with, and if she's modeling, then it's not as intense as direct sexual interaction, but it's intense in another way in terms of the numbers of men who view her and who have some awareness of her physical form. So in those kind of situations, the potency is lessened to a man who's stacked. However, when a woman is virgin, her potency is high. Her capacity of having those vibrations of connection, of communication, even beyond thought. It's not just a matter of like, I'm thinking of number 8. Can you think of that? It's not that type of thing. It's like vibration and communication without thought. Just looking and just kind of like having ideas without thinking about ideas. That type of communication and vibrations, and it's not just ideas, but it's coalescence, it's connection and like continuation, without completion of thoughts. So that's the type of wavelength that virgin women have with a man who's stacked. And again, it's extremely distractive. It's beautiful, it's amazing, it's miraculous. It's holy, it's sacred, and it requires a lot of responsibility and discipline. But again, that's part of the tremendous powers of women, and particularly a virgin woman. The effect that she has on men who are stacked, established, disciplined, honest, righteous. So that's another category. And the susceptibility of temptation, being approached by young girls, young women who make advances and are looking for security, looking for a father figure, looking for protection and assurance and companionship and guidance, and very interested in sexual interaction, intimacy, and otherwise, virgin and otherwise. Significant temptation. So that's the second category, particularly virgin women, when a man is heightened in his practice. The third category of kinfolk is effeminate men, whether out sodomites or LGBTQ or otherwise. But very often, such men, many of such men, not all, but many such men, also operate on a high level of cognition, and pick up on the things that much of society is ignoring, and additionally, including potent men, including virgin women, including the vibes along the way. And in one hand, are looking for like guidance and genuine companionship, not even sex, but just like looking for somebody to trust, because in that realm, it's extreme amount of predatoriness, and it's severe consequences. So when effeminate men in that respect see a man who's actually honest, and like he's disciplined, and you can see it, just like the virgin women can see it, and actually the women who are not virgins can see it as well, but just have less influence. The effeminate men actually have further influence than the dime pieces, because the effeminate men know the psychology of the righteous man, and know some of the ways of approaching a righteous man in a way that the righteous man has to respond in a favorable conversational way, by asking questions, by playing that subordinate role of student, um, and having some knowledge about what to ask, and thus not being threatening, because it's a student, and calling upon the obligation of a spiritual teacher to provide education, provide teaching, but at the same time just wanting to share that company, and to share that vibration. And additionally, that's the benevolent side of it. The other side of it is the further malice or the malevolent, because the effeminate men who have those capabilities also have tremendous skills and susceptibility of manipulation and predatoriness as well. And so part of that is the pimp game, gaslighting, and guiding the spiritual man off course for many of different types of motivation, whether it's personally generated motivations, or whether it's being hired by others to do that. So that's the third category of people, when a man has that discipline. So the point is that amidst those conditions, when a righteous man who's backed up in discipline, is continually subjected to the imposition of the sexual advances, and sexual suggestions from the posters of half-naked women, and additionally, it has an effect, and he is increasingly susceptible to each of those three categories of women, or three categories of people. One, the young sexually attractive women who make an advance. Two is the virgin women who are just on vibes, and are interested and responsive to sexual interaction, but don't necessarily want that. Want just connection, regardless of whether there's abuse at the house or not. The women are in that mode, are already menstruating, 14 years old, 15 years old, on that mindset of relationship and settling down, but without necessarily a lot of knowledge about the discipline of how to do that. And so it's just a matter of like, yo, there's a man who has it, go. And it requires discipline on a man's part to be disciplined. Even when she's with her parents, she can be very influential with her parents and guiding her parents towards saying, no, let's go here, let's talk with him, let's ask questions. I'm speaking from personal experience. And to be honest, I get into teacher mode, and my thoughts are all on one thing, but she's so young. No, even if she's menstruating in addition, it's like, it's too much. It's like it's too much to call upon the parents, and additionally, and that's what I experienced for a number of years. And when things get so, in some situations, to be honest, some parents in some conditions are such that, one, either the parents are coming from a tradition where 14 years old is like, it's actually very acceptable in terms of arranging marriage. So that's one thing. It's also a thing where some parents, they're in like severe conditions, like they're parents of 8-year-olds who are already trafficking their 8-year-olds. So a parent with a 14-year-old, even if they're not trying to traffic, they're under severe conditions to find some type of solution for their girl, whose powers are tremendous and beyond their capabilities. That's the other thing too, of one of the reasons why speaking to the spirit, and how when parents being overpowered by their children, and desperate to find guidance and some type of social, communal, community discipline and communication and guidance for children, because the parents are without that type of knowledge or training or practice to do it on their own, and there being a very immediate need for that. So that's somewhat of a side note. A recent thing again shared through the studies and work, and prayers and meditation have been out for a while, working to get back into it. So, but part of the process, part of the things that have been shared recently. So, but point here is that parents of women, young women who are very young, but at the same time menstruating and in that capacity for marriage and procreation, being very influenced and very um, such women, young women, have significant influence over the parents to appease such a young woman, yet without the young woman still being knowledgeable about the processes and the requirements of appropriate relationship with a grown man, um, in the guise of marriage as husband and wife. So that's part of the challenge and the temptation. So in those three categories, when a man is backed up and gets stimulation from the soft core pornography culture around a man, with the posters, with the women around, and additionally, it wears down the defenses, it wears down the dean. And it doesn't excuse anything that he does, anything that I do, but just explaining the conditions, because when there is that indulgence, when there is that indiscretion, when there is that falling off, he's definitely responsible. He has to answer that. I have to answer for that. But at the same time, it's a matter of recognizing that he's not the only one who has to answer for that. It's the people who contribute to that downfall as well, who are putting the pitfalls around him. And some people are knowledgeable about that. Some people are less knowledgeable about that. And particularly for the sake of those who are less knowledgeable about that, that's where the reason for why this is being shared. So, in that experience, as a man who is on a spiritual dean and does it as much as possible as I can, and has the susceptibility to those indiscretions and indulgences and falling off, the question becomes how to do it in an optimal way. As I've described before, there are a number of different scenarios. There's one, endeavoring to have sex in marriage with a woman who's not, maybe a virgin, maybe not a virgin, but very young, in an immediate sense, without necessarily having all things secured, such that the next day, whether seeing her parents beforehand or not, because the situations are different in different things, because again, parents aren't always providing the necessary safety. Oftentimes parents are providing abuse. So in that scenario, in that intentionality of marriage, and even issuing of a contract or otherwise, and dowry appropriately, after having sex, and additionally her vanishing, either by her own will or somebody else or whatever else. But that's part of the susceptibility, and that's part of the harm, the hurtfulness, as one of the outcomes, one of the consequences of those signals. A man's defenses being lessened and him being further susceptible to those indulgences. It's on him, it's his fault, it's his responsibility, he's the one to blame. But it's just a matter of recognizing cause and effect in that sequence. That's one scenario. Another scenario is pornography. And the pornography is, it causes all types of harm itself. It's, as brethren said, it's devil. It's spirit, it's draining of the spirit. And it's a mind meld of just woeful corruption, multiplied and compounded. So it's all types of harm. However, that being said, in that scenario of a man expending himself, molesting and essentially subjecting himself to rape, because that's what it is. When a man masturbates, when a man expels his life force, even without masturbating, that's rape. It's a woman raping a man, and everybody else who's involved with that woman, the director, the videos, and the producers, and the distributors, and anybody else involved. They're all raping the man. Each man who's expending himself. It's all rape of a man. It's mental rape to the point of causing physical harm to himself. Even when him being the manipulator, it's a testimony to how powerful the woman is. That's not hyperbole. That's not pimp talk. That's not um, wanker talk. That's facts. That's how strong women are. So it's beneficial to recognize that, because it's necessary for people to recognize the harm that people are causing. Even the citizens who make the pornography legal are responsible, because they're sanctioning that. Not only that, but they get benefit from that through taxation and otherwise. So they're banking off of what the pornography is doing. And so their hands are in that too. So all that being said, that's another option for decreasing the distraction, because when the man is celibate, he becomes further distracted to those three factors of the woman making the advance, of the virgin woman who's ready, come what may, kingdom come. And then the third one is the effeminate men, whether LGBTQ or just like heightened mentals, but at the same time, severe manipulation and predatoriness that guides, that distracts and deters men, spiritual men, from path. And not necessarily a matter of like physical seduction or otherwise, but just gaslighting and confusion and like distracting a man from his priorities at that moment. So, and that can have very, very devastating effects, to be honest, without even having sexual intercourse, without even being anywhere near any type of sexual innuendo. It's distraction from his discipline and his deeds. So that's the susceptibility that a man has. I cannot speak from the perspective of a man who is celibate with a commitment of monasticism, with the promise of being celibate for life. I practice. Okay, I should qualify this. This is chastity, and actually it's celibacy until marriage, but it's chastity until the violation. So, anyways, all that being said, I don't have the experience of being a monk, of taking a vow of celibacy to be celibate for the rest of my life. I abstain from doing that. So I can't speak from that experience, because there may be another outlet for the person who does take that vow, and channeling that back into the religiosity, and that's another point too. So I can't speak from that experience, and that's a possibility. But I am guided to be married, and so that's my focus. I'm guided to be continually vulnerable to the influences of a woman until being married, and able to direct those energies and proclivities to a particular specific committed woman who's committed to me and life and raising children with me. So I don't have that option of being a monastic at this moment, and being and directing those sexual energies to a spiritual discipline exclusively and extemporally, meaning beyond this earthly realm. I'm guided to be in a relationship with a woman, and so the sexual urges and suggestions that are imposed upon me are guided towards a relationship with a woman. And when that relationship with a woman is delayed or obstructed or otherwise, in an interim limbo experience, there's the necessity of finding another way. Prayer and meditation is very beneficial. Keeping a distance and living secluded is effective, but it's not an ultimate solution. And in the meanwhile, there's continual susceptibility to the detriments. And thus it becomes a matter of how to channel those susceptibilities and vulnerabilities in a minimally harmful way, meaning in a way that where the harm is minimized. Self-affliction is very harmful. I've already given some scenarios of just falling off into actually having sex. There's obviously this scenario of having sex without marriage initially, and that's all huge types of harms. There's a scenario of having like sex in a an abbreviated marriage situation, but again, very like like thrown together, whatever. And in that scenario, the likelihood of the woman just vanishing one way or the other, whether it's through lack of protection, whether it's her own lack of protection, meaning like in the sleep or whatever, being swooped or creeping out or otherwise. So there's that susceptibility and the harm caused from that, which is considerable. There's the scenario of relieving or perceiving, it's not even relieving a man's self, but channeling that energy and concentration towards pornography, which is all types of harm, but at the same time, there's a distance. And there's all different types of rationalities and ways men pimp themselves in terms of trying to excuse that type of harm. It's difficult to argue against it. And I'm speaking again for myself personally. The other scenario is trying to channel it in further healthy ways, but or less harmful ways, I should say, than actual explicit pornography. But then that gets into the whole trope of soft core pornography options, whether it's women dancing who are not all the way naked, or whether it's like looking at women or directing attentions towards women in another way. It's all different types of forms of sexual exploitation, one way or the other. So that's that. Now here's the kicker, and I've said this before, and I've got to wrap it up soon too. I keep saying that, but anyways, there is guidance when talking about the monastic situation of channeling the sexual energy through a vow of celibacy and just devoting it to that may exist. I cannot speak from that experience because I don't make that vow. But what I also do is observe how people who do make that vow still are involved in the manipulations that involve sexual exploitation of conventional society. So that provides less faith in the integrity of those vows too. Not saying that all monks are like pimps or whatever, but just that, like, particularly the structures that monks are, even the Theravada monks in the forests, have relationship and attachments to conventionality that is involved in sexual exploitation, even when it's just the governments and the militaries that are holding lands and guarding the safety of lands, the forests that the monks are dwelling in. And additionally, there's still some type of form of attachment and relationship and collusion in those relationships. So it's still not detached from the sexual exploitation. So it renders less plausible the integrity, the absolute integrity of the vow as a sanctity to channel in those sexual energies. And that's not even an option at the moment because I'm guided in the mitzvah, be fruitful and multiply, peravu. So that's specifically from Torah. Now, that being said, another consideration is channeling the sexual energy into a religious discipline, Islam, Judaism. Christianity is a little bit challenging because that's monasticism. Even Protestantism is based upon monastic and listening to the Gospels of Jesus. Hinduism, predominantly. Taoism is less of an organized religiosity per se. So just leaving that for the side for the moment. But particularly Judaism and Islam. Challenges I've articulated recently is when being further learned and knowledgeable about the pragmatics in the organized religiosity of both religions and traditions that have truth and that share truth. There is the allowance of the sexual exploitation, the enslavement of women, the enslavement of people, including women, including girls, children, and sexual relations with slaves. Now, that sounds just crass and all types of atrocity in today's standard, but it's the traditional permissibility. And it may not be as acceptable in secular society, but it's still acceptable within the tradition. And it's just a matter of the nuanced way that it's implemented, so that it might not be an outright chain around the neck type of situation. But it's enslavement through other means, whether it's through employment and recognizing that how hostile society is, so that when people don't have attachments, that's to an organized society or organized group. Like it's extremely vulnerable, particularly women and particularly children and particularly women with children. So women who are vulnerable are increasingly susceptible to agreeing towards arrangements of subordination, including occasional sex in those situations, whether it's a young woman being employed at a spot and agreeing to have sex, and she might be broken off a large chunk of the proceeds. However, it's permissible. Generally speaking, I have to be very careful about how I say this. We have to be very careful how we say this. Servitude is permissible. Sex with servitude is permissible. It's not counted, or it's not acknowledged as adultery. It's not acknowledged. It's not considered as having sex outside of marriage. It's having sex with somebody who's in a bonded relationship, and there is a certain amount of dehumanization within that. Very ironically and troubling, but that's the actuality, and it plays itself out in contemporary ways, and in rationalizing contemporary ways. Now, I can speak less knowledgeably about the nuances of that personally and experientially, but knowing the tradition in a fair way, there become all these different ways of rationalizing it. Even, well, put it like this: because there's an awareness of the availability to sexually exploit others, to contribute to economic conditions that make people further desperate to sell themselves into servitude. Because there's awareness of that, that becomes less of a plausible, practical option or methodology for maintaining one's chastity, because when the very teachings, the holy teachings, the scriptures that require chastity and at the same time allow for enslavement, servitude, and sexual interaction with servants. That opens the doors for all different types of rationalizations of sexual exploitation that can be considered less harmful. For example, two scenarios. One scenario is where it's a traditional community. I won't say if it's Jewish or Islam or whatever else, but it's a traditional community. In this traditional community, there might be a woman who is a young woman, 14, 15 years old, and is orphaned or is a refugee or is in some type of desperate situation, and she needs to attach herself to another family or another something. That family hires the woman to be a live-in nanny or something to that effect. And the understanding is that, like, she's a servant within the house. She's supported, she can get education and everything else like that, but she works for that family. And part of the nature of that work under the books, because it's not necessarily the servitude, not her bringing the nanny or the au pair or whatever else, but part of the arrangement that's understood very, very quietly is that the young son who's coming of age and needs some confidence and introduction or whatever else, that she's his surrogate wife, so to speak, or whatever else. That's something that's traditional. It's not as conventionally accepted today because it's other pretenses or whatever else. But anyways, that's what's involved, and she's willing. The young woman is willing because she knows the alternative is being turned out on the streets and forcefully drugged and developing a heroin addict or otherwise. So she'd much rather live with a comfortable, affluent family in the affluent neighborhood and have the prospect of going to school and being respected and being supported, and being able to marry a husband at some point, and just being providing some sexual services to a family member of the family. It's a very crass example, and it's I won't say it's a hypothetical, but it's a scenario. I'm not saying it's an actual historic thing that I'm testifying at this moment, but just that's a very plausible scenario. That's one thing. Now, the consideration is whether that is a further harm to the woman and to the boy and to the family and everybody involved, whether that's a further harm compared to the scenario of a boy viewing pornography, let's say 10 women, who are located in different places around the world, are comparatively anonymous, and don't have sex with a man, even stay virgins, but just are on a special pornography service of just showing themselves naked, or like responding to chats or whatever else, and without actually losing their quote unquote virginity, and having comparative anonymity so that they can go to school and continue on or whatever else. Which one is further harmful for all the participants? And this is not an advocacy for pornography in any form, any of those scenarios. But there is, no, just leave that for it is for a moment. It's not a sanctioning. All of it is harmful. All of it is painful. All of it is a relinquishment of soul. And there's all different types of pain that result from all of those experiences. I guess the question is the lesser of two evils. Don't like those questions. But particularly when the surrounding environment at the moment is imposing itself, and that surrounding environment is sodomy and pedophilia, and additional forms of abuses. That's not even making sense at this point. And now we're over 3 hours at this point. We're going on 4 hours. So we're dipping into the storage at this point. And it's going to be what it's going to be at this point, because now we're like almost half an hour to midnight. And we do have, it would be beneficial to eat something today. I haven't even drinking any water today. How about that? So yes, this is a convoluted, like, a convoluted endeavor of explaining or rationalizing or whatever recent experiences with pornography amidst the recent experiences of pornography being imposed. And genuinely endeavoring to find the healthiest solution. It exists beyond oneself. We can go into the poetic theology of proclaiming that it exists within the oneself. And that's truth, and that's helpful. Yet at the same time, there's the necessity of dealing with earthly pragmatics. So, that's some of that side note concerning the storefront as we are getting ready to conclude this joint, as tends to be the case. Mosquito bites again becoming further pronounced as the darkness descends. That's much of it at this point. The best of my ability of articulation and reconciling, for the sake of all kinfolk, who are directly involved in the same conditions and circumstances. So we can sit here for the next hour to see if it's going to shut off again, or we can just conclude. How about talking about His Majesty Haile Selassie I? Well, beneficial. He's married. Um, Deals left with those conditions. Not less knowledgeable about what his experience is as a prince before marriage. His experience of virginity before marriage, and less of an inclination of delving into any type of salacious um, private stories or whatever else, because the corroborability of that is less plausible. So it's relevant, but at the same time, they're for the relevant things. Um, when dealing with these issues of preparing for marriage indigenously, it's increasingly relevant, but at the same time, the availability of those teachings lends itself to be, again, um, welcome, yet other than a priority for investigation. So in the meanwhile, we look at the basic tenets and guidance of marriage, and focusing on that, even without that being the immediate experience, still having faith and trust and diligence and focus on that as the experience, and the eventuality, and continuing to find and cultivate the discipline of chastity and honesty and respect and support and relationship with all our relations, and particularly within that perfect balance of man and woman, husband and wife, and the purposefulness of it all. The purposefulness. To be honest, one thing that I recognize, one of the susceptibilities that I have in terms of being open to the suggestion, to the temptation, is the devil screen here. And that's not shirking responsibility, but just, again, recognizing where the cause and effects are. And so when we talk about these walls of protecting ourselves, one of the walls that I recognize is not having the internet and not having a lot of those suggestions very at the ready, because I know how powerful those suggestions are. I'm very susceptible to that, and that's known. So that's what it is. What is recognized at the moment is actually even just having this here in the sanctuary, this double screen. Doing this for 3 hours. That's not healthy. That's affliction, and that's part of the consequence of what I've done with the internet in terms of pornography for years and years. I've stopped it a long time ago, but even then, there's still consequences. So that's part of what explains the ongoing compulsion to do these joints. So that it's karma, and that's what it is, and there's purposefulness within it, but yet we recognize that. So that being said, one of the ways of going further and healing from it is recognizing that the devil screen itself, there are benefits from that come that are provided with it. So it's difficult to just absolutely renounce it and forsake it and not use it again. But at the same time, it's beneficial to establish like limits and boundaries. And one of those is literally keeping it outside of this domicile. Not even regarding just online, but just even doing any work on the screen, even accessing any media, recorded music files, whatever. Learn the music ourselves, to do it ourselves. So that's what we're working with and working towards. I'm working on this project at the moment, and so that involves me being on this screen a long time. And when I'm on the screen a long time, there's increasing susceptibility to do these things. And then there's increasing susceptibility to post these things, and then to be online, and then to receive the messages online, and then in those messages online, being availed to the suggestions initially. And it's all my fault. It's all my blame. But I have to recognize like what the causal factors are so that I can be further disciplined. So what we're looking at the moment, again, amidst, God willing, the completion of this project and my last major project, that takes me away from my dean on the daily. Then at some point, amidst preparation of music and language skills, even then, keeping this device, the computer itself, in a different space, away from the sanctuary, so that the sanctuary, the energy here is is cultivated that's further like away from the digital experience, not just the Wi-Fi, but just even the computer itself. And then when there is necessity of accessing documents, creating documents, accessing media, music files, and additionally doing language studies, to do that in a different space, whether that's our schoolhouse or someplace else, but just as a physicality, not having the double screen here. And that's strong language. We have to be mindful of that. And peace be with the devil. Peace and blessings be with the devil. God bless all beings. So, anyways, that's one of the things that we learn from this in this process. And in the meanwhile, there's purpose in completion of the project, and in that process of completion, there's ongoing susceptibility to having this distraction here. So we're working on our best. God willing, the project is completed in the near future, maybe even within the next week or so, and then we can be further further follow through, further in following through, and distancing the device from our domicile, in the interest of optimizing the sanctity of the sanctuary. And it would probably be a lot easier on my eyes too. So there's purpose within everything. Much of it is simply learning, and sometimes when it's repeated and continually, it's beneficial to find that path beyond the repeated challenges. And like the first time or whatever, one can say, okay, that's a learning experience. In repeated happenings, it's like, yo, what's going on here? I think I've learned the lesson, but at the same time, obviously, there's still something else to learn. So sometimes it's beneficial to pause and concentrate. So, the example of His Majesty Haile Selassie I, in dealing with a lot of different problems, shares that. That's a general reference. Fatigue is here, and then I'm also thinking about other prophets and sages through the ages. At the meanwhile, the voices of the liquid spirits are getting louder. So that helps to provide some motivation for concluding this joint and actually getting something to eat before falling asleep, God willing. So again, all things in praise of the Most High Elohim. Blessed love and peace of Rastafari.